basics are pretty simple. I'll show you my few little tricks and all that. And I'll just share, you know, the methods I use, and then we'll go down to the greenhouse. We'll mix some potting soil. We'll take some seedlings that there are multiples of, and I'll show you my techniques for teasing them apart and stepping them up. We'll talk about stepping up. I'll show you, I have both pictures here of a germination chamber, but we'll also show you the one we have working down there. It should be heating up nicely. We just got it going today. We are going to be moving all of our seedling production from here to Grandview, where our biochar facility is. And that's because the way we're heating here is one of those outdoor boilers that basically for convenience smolders all day. And that's the worst kind of fire you can have. So we're currently going to be changing how that works and only use that when it's cold enough that it's burning hot. And we're going to be making sure the wood's drier and put a shelf in there so we get more air. But that's only going to be for emergencies or if there's a snow load or something, because we're going to move everything over to the biochar plant where the energy we make, and that's another discussion, but we have a wonderful video about all that. The energy we make there is not only carbon negative, but dynamically carbon negative, because once you put the char in the soil, life builds on it. So it's thrilling to me that we're going to be heating our seedlings with that and not polluting, which is what we've been doing for too long, you know. And so number one's going to look a little different. We have changed things around, took all the big tables, or most of them, and moved them over to Grandview. And that setup will be happening by the time we do the next workshop, so if you're there, you can see it. And it's pretty elegant. You all can begin to look for them too. Turns out that people who heat hot water for their pools have these little units that cost about $400. They're kind of modular. And sometimes they're just tired of doing it. They don't like how it looks, or they move or whatever, and those things come down. They don't have a high resale value. Sometimes they get a few leaks. We were able to get 10 of them for $45 each, like $400 brand new. You lay those down flat and run hot water to them, and all of a sudden they are a hot pad, you know. So it's pretty ideal. We'll set up a thermostat to control it, and then we'll just put some movable insulation over them, and then a little tunnel over that within the whole greenhouse structure we have. We shouldn't have to heat the air at all. We should be able to just use the energy there. And that's always our mode, is to try and figure out how to do everything with the least amount of energy possible. Even though the biochar plant produces tons of energy, it's not about showing people how to waste energy, because every bit of that energy is needed, you know. So that's how we'll do it in the future. Tonight we're going to look at how to do it, how to use a greenhouse, make a simple greenhouse and simply heat with electric cables. And once again, if you use movable insulation, that can take way less energy than the greenhouse. You know, we're also going to talk about how to do it inside, you know, and what the pitfalls of that and how to overcome those pitfalls. So basically going to try and get you set up so you can grow seedlings no matter what. And there's a lot of reasons why you want to grow your own seedlings. We all have a limited selection when we go to a greenhouse. You know, now it's better if you go to farmers markets, because the farmers are really paying attention to the varieties, and there's a lot, and each one's got their own opinion. So you can probably find quite a selection of varieties at a farmer's market. But the nurseries, probably because they go crazy if they try to have tons of selections. And of course, what would happen is some wouldn't sell and some would, and you know, those kinds of things. They do some basic standard ones, and you don't get as much selection. So it works a lot better for them, for people who want to have control of what they're growing, to do it, to grow their own seedlings. And my favorite example is the one that we start first. If I'd had them in the germination chamber, they'd probably be popping. And maybe we'll move some of them in tonight while I show that to you. And that's onions. You know, I mean, you have a couple options for onions. You can order sets or buy sets. Very few selections on that. You know, usually they don't even tell you what variety you're getting. You know, you can order from companies that sell them. And there was a woman in Georgia who was doing organic starts, but I don't know if she's even still in business. And otherwise, the one that most people get from is a company called Dixondale in Texas. And they've got a great selection. They're a long-time family company, but they're not organic at all, you know. And they basically are selling you plants, you know, and they're nice-sized plants, and they'll do quite well. And they'll do better than sets. Onion sets tend to want to bolt. You know, the smaller the set, the less chance it'll bolt, but they're just not as good as plants. Once again, though, they've got a better selection. There's more selection from Dixondale, but if you really want to be able to pick and choose the ones that do best, we're in a kind of strange place. Our best seedlings tend to be intermediate onions, ones that don't really need because we're right on the cusp between long day and short day. I've managed to make both long day and short day work, but I like the intermediate ones the most. And that's nothing you have control over if you're not growing your own. So onions are a good example, but broccoli's another one. There's just a few varieties you can buy. There's a wonderful array of ones that you can actually just get, like, a quick one like Blue Wind, and then a longer one like Arcadia, and you can just like start them and start them all. For how many people here are growing commercially? Right. Okay. I figured that. So you can interpret. I'm mostly going to talk to smaller operations, and so you might do a 128, though maybe not, of broccoli. 128 refers to the cell size, and 128 is pretty much the perfect size for commercial growers. It's big enough that the plant's got a good start, but gives you a whole lot. For home gardeners, much more likely to want to do a 72 or something. But even a 72, you may not want 72 broccolis at once. You could have several different things in that flat. But you may also have 6 Blue Winds, 6 Arcadia, 6 of several ones with different timings, so that you get a succession of broccoli. And you can do that for yourselves really easily. Not so easy if you're buying plants. Though, like I said, farmers market, that's your best bet if you don't have that. So we're going to talk about how to do that. We're going to briefly touch on, and this is an hour-and-a-half class. We did 6 hours on this a couple of years ago. So refer to the video, for more detail. And I remember I spent a lot of time talking about seed varieties. I'm not going to do that at all tonight. I'm going to talk about a very few and answer questions. And we'll do that right away, probably, because you start with the seed. But now's the time to be thinking about ordering seeds if you haven't. And there's a load of great companies out there. We have a local one, So True Seed. I guess I have my habits. I mostly order seeds. We mostly order seeds, and we order from Fedco, which is a co-op. And I really love them because they will not carry Monsanto-made seeds. When Semanis was bought out by Fedco, and Semanis had a bunch of seeds I really liked. Things like Mars, Red Onion, just a whole bunch of really wonderful seeds that really worked well for me. I just wasn't willing to buy them, and Fedco actually doesn't either. And so I admire their integrity. Loads of good information. In fact, in here, and maybe I'll pass it around. Maybe while somebody's leafing through it, you can find it for me. In here, there is a chart that talks about the best temperature for each vegetable to germinate at. That's very useful. I actually don't need it because we use a germination chamber by and large. And everything with the way a germination chamber works is it creates basically a shower effect, a whole lot of very high humidity. And if you have that, 72 degrees works for everything. I haven't found anything that didn't just pop as fast as it could possibly pop at 72 degrees. It's a nice, safe temperature. If you're using heat mat and something like that, you won't have that same intense humidity. You might want to adjust. You might want peppers a little warmer. And so this chart in here is very useful. If you contact them, they'll send it to you. Something to know about Fedco seeds, they don't take phone orders. They've got really good prices, but they keep their staff small, and so they don't take phone orders. They don't do fast orders, And so that's why, I didn't bring the Johnny's catalog. Somebody must have walked off with it. I grabbed all the catalogs. Do people know Johnny's Selected Seed? Johnny's Selected Seed is our second one. They're a worker-owned company, so that's great. We got some really nice companies we'd like to support. So Johnny's, I thought I had that catalog here. I should have checked more carefully. I guess somebody took it home with them or something. But Johnny's is the opposite of Fedco as far as calling in orders. You can call an order in there. It used to be by noon. Now I think they're saying 1, but by noon, and they'll ship it the same day. And if you ship a priority, you get it in a couple days, and the shipping is just not that much. So that's our fallback because we never order perfectly, or for some reason, crop failure, whatever, we need more seeds, and boom, we call Johnny's, we get it really fast, Within a few days, we got our seed. Just be sure to call in early in the morning. Great selections. There's a few things that are all American winners that only Johnny's carries. They eventually let them go. Like for the longest time, you could only get Zephyr, which is one of our very favorite squashes. You could only get it from Johnny's. Finally, Fedco has it too, and Zephyr is one of those, favorites, I guess. I'll mention a few favorites, in a few categories, and then I'll answer questions as best I can on that, and then Baker's Creek, we love these guys for diversity of particularly winter squash. Summer squash is pretty darn good too. Eggplant, tomatoes. They have great diversity in everything, but they really shine on those. Incredible diversity, and the thing I most love is if you are trying to grow summer squash in our climate, in our region, the odds are very good. Not everybody, but most people are really plagued by vine borers. How many people have been bothered by vine borers? Vine borers will kill your squash, just pretty automatically. There's an easy solution for summer squash and even for winter squash. Less so to me with winter because you're probably growing a lot more of that at once because you're storing it. But for summer squash, you just spray the bottom of the plant twice a week with BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, and soap. It's not a problem. But for winter squash, I don't want to have to spray all the squash we grow. So I try to focus on just growing Machata or Mixta families. Those are two families of winter squash. There's 4 families. There's Machata, Pepo, P-E-P-O, and Maxima, and Mixta. Mixta is the Cushaw family. The Native Americans grew a whole lot of Cushaws. And then Machata is the butternut family. And butternut is our go-to squash. I think most people, if you want production, butternut's the go-to squash, and it's a great squash, But I like diversity. We had a squash tasting here. It was a whole lot of fun. And if you have diversity and want Machata, this is the catalog. Incredible array of amazing squashes that are in the Machata or Mixta family. And so it's just a great catalog. And it's a family-owned catalog, family-owned company. So those are the ones. Also Territorial. I really don't order that much from Territorial anymore. But it's a very good catalog. What it really shines for is they have a winter catalog. If you buy from them, they send you a catalog in the summer. And they have a bunch of stuff that's specifically aimed at winter. As far as my favorite seeds, tomatoes, everybody's got their favorite heirlooms, right? I don't need to go into heirlooms probably. I can. I'll say Prudence Purple is what I do instead of growing Brandywine, because Brandywine to me is like the typhoid Mary of the tomato farm, is it great? Yes. But does it get sick if you look at it wrong? Yes, So we just have given up on it, Instead, I do Prudence Purple. And Fedco's got this discussion about how there's all this controversy at Fedco. They usually get along with it, but some people think it's terrible. Other people think it's as good as Brandywine. To me, it's good enough. It doesn't get sick. It's quite productive. And I have to grow Cherokee Purple every year. They don't make many, but I sure love them. And then another favorite heirloom of mine is persimmon. But we could talk about heirlooms for the whole night. So I'm going to assume that you have your favorite heirlooms. If not, there's tons of information out about that. Our go-to crops for tomatoes that we get yield from no matter the weather. This year we're talking actually about putting a plastic hoop house up to keep the heirlooms dry and isolating and putting them over on the 4-acre tract, which is over at Grandview, near no other tomatoes, so that even if they get it, they won't infect the rest of our tomatoes. So we may have great heirlooms. Last year we didn't even bother. We got so hammered the year before. We got hammered this year too by late blight. We kept our tomatoes alive with sprays, but if we had heirlooms, they would have just dragged the other ones down with them, But we missed the heirlooms, so we're going to probably give them their own protected place, So what we do grow is all the ones that are noted for late blight resistant. We are incredibly impressed with Defiant. It's about that big, I guess that's 2.5 to 3 ounces or something like that. It's not a slicer, but it does really well. All of these, by the way, if you give them good nutrition and wait till they're dead ripe, it tastes pretty darn good. Not an heirloom, they're just not an heirloom, there's no doubt about it. But we get tomatoes, So we grow Defiant, we grow Mountain Magic is probably the most blight-resistant tomato I've ever seen. It reliably produces, it's like a big cherry. Very, very productive. Plum Regal is with sprays. We do spray them too. We use that's another whole class, and indeed, we have the full disease. Yeah, we did a class, I think probably in 2012 or something, about controlling disease. So I give you our whole wrap about how we do that there, and we do it. We spray quite a bit. With that spray routine, we get plenty of Plum Regals, even though they're blight damaged, to can. So we do Plum Regal, Mountain Magic, Defiant, Mountain Merit. It's a bigger one, not as big on the flavor, and it's more like Plum Regal. Defiant and Mountain Magic are the ones that are pretty bulletproof. We manage to keep them pretty clean and for a long time and keep them going. I'm forgetting the name. Pearl, I think, I'm pretty sure is the blight resistant, cherry. The truth is the only cherry that we grow Smarty because Marshall Hagen, one of our growers, was a commercial grower, and it was so productive for him. He was able to buy a tractor with it, and to me, they're really not very useful in the summertime because they don't ripen evenly enough and they're tiny. So it's a lot of work to find enough ripe ones. Come fall, they really shine, and they'll just soldier on incredibly unless they've gone under to blight earlier in the season. So in a greenhouse, they're quite productive. We grow that, and we grow Sun Gold because we love them and they get disease really easy, but we can't help it. We love them so much we grow them.
How about Mountain Fresh Plus?
Mountain Fresh Plus is one we grow. It doesn't have much resistance to blight. We grow it because John Nilsson, who we work with a lot, that's what he trialed his char grow on, and it's the most widely grown commercial tomato on the East Coast. In a good year, where blight's not bad and we can control it with spray, it'll make a ton of tomatoes. We've got shots, I think we even have some on the web, of the production we got in 2013. We got, I think it was 26 pounds to the plant. It was phenomenal. Now that's because we used charcoal and we had pond muck and we just did everything right. We sprayed compost tea. But it can be very productive. They make big, gorgeous tomatoes, and they don't taste like much unless they're dead ripe. I knew a tomato grower who grew that series. Most of them were developed by Randy Gardner here at the Mills River Horticultural Station. And he said, Pat, the best retailers leave these in their back room until there's one spoiling in a box, and then they put them out. We say dead ripe, we mean you got to eat them right away. But then otherwise they're really tasteless. They're like the ones in the store. But once they're dead ripe, and that's what they're designed to do. They're designed to travel well. They're built for the commercial trade. And they're very good that way. And there's a bunch of hybrids that are kind of in between there. I used to like Paragon. That's been pulled from the trade. And I want to encourage everybody. Does everybody know about the radio show we do on Tuesdays? Call in if you got tomato questions. We can go over it more then. I've got a lot of opinions about a lot of them, more than we have time for. But I'd say really the ones to focus on, if you don't plan on spraying, I'd have in one place as far away from where you grow your heirlooms, which most people have to do, right? As far away as you can, grow some of these blight-resistant ones. If you can keep them in the dry, you'll do way better. Everybody knows why I'm saying that, right? It's late blight. Early blight, we can deal with it. There's ways around it. Late blight's the thing that takes us down all the time, and because we have cool nights, we're more prone to late blight than most people on the East Coast. It's those cool nights that get us, and that's when you know you're going to get it. If you got a cool night, that's when you're going to get it. I'm getting off topic. But anyway, so that's tomatoes. For peppers, it's been so long since I've grown it, I've forgotten the name. I used to love a hybrid. It was a wonderful one, and it was one of those ones that Monsanto bought, so I don't even remember the name of it anymore. We went to Pepper King of the North. Pepper King of the North is a wonderful open pollinated one that is close to as good as that hybrid that I was so into for years. So we grow that for our number one heirloom. For our number one bell. We also love Jimmy Nardello. They're a thin skin, kind of narrow pepper, kind of a pain to use. There's no pepper I know that's more consistently sweet than that. It's just amazing, Jimmy Nardello. Yeah. We also grow one of the many bull's horn. I think we're growing a hybrid right now. But all the bull's horn ones are really nice. And we grow Anaheim. Don't grow Anaheim if you're not going to roast them and peel them. The skin is really tough. They got wonderful sweetness, but they're not that satisfying to eat raw. They really were grown to be, they got a tougher skin that's actually easier to peel, So that's what they're for. They're a stuffing pepper. They're a roasting and stuffing pepper. Dead ripe, they're spectacular, There are many other peppers, but those are the main ones that we grow, Squash, we grow Raven for zucchini. We grow Zephyr for a yellow wheat. Actually stopped growing crookneck, even though I will readily admit that crookneck, when it's perfect, is the best tasting squash I've ever had. The problem is perfect occurs once every 5 years or something. And the rest of the time, it's a fine squash. It's even a real good one, but not as consistently flavorful as the Zephyr, and nowhere near as productive or as precocious. Zephyr is incredibly productive. It's precocious. It comes in early, and the flavor is really, really good. You know, we also grow Benning's Green Tint. That's one of the more flavorful squash, and we grow one of the Kusas. They're the Mediterranean ones, the Middle Eastern ones. They're kind of a white scallop squash, and or no, it's not a white scallop. It's a white kind of like a big fat zucchini. Those ones are very tender skinned, but those are all squash, summer squash that have flavor. A famous seed saver, Ben Quisenberry, once said that the only one to grow is Romanesco. And I would grant him that Romanesco is the most flavorful zucchini I know. And if you're a home grower, you might want to give 5 square feet to one plant that hides its squash so you always get monsters, you know. And it's hard to pick. Am I putting it down? Not for flavor, but it's just, as a commercial grower, it's just too much trouble. It takes up too much space, doesn't produce enough. It's almost like they're camouflaged. They're hard to see, so they're always getting too big on us, and they're hard to pick. They don't come off the plant well. But they taste incredible, you know. And what Ben Quisenberry said about it was, that was one to grow unless you were thirsty, you know. And so he's saying all the rest are watery. I think since then, Zephyr's come along. There's a few other flavorful ones, you know. So that's what we do for squash. For winter squash, you know, our taste trial winners this year were, not counting butternut. We didn't even bother, you know, we didn't really, I guess we grew butternut, but it didn't really win the taste trial, though everybody thought it was a really good one. Greek Red, available from Baker's Creek, and Black Futsu, F-U-T-S-U, you know. Those are the ones we like the most. For Eggplant, Orient Charm, it's a wonderful kind of a, I guess you'd say it's a pink, but it's kind of a darker pink. It's got white right around the calyx, so it's really gorgeous. And actually, I've noticed there's some variations. Sometimes they come out white. And they say it's high yielding. It's incredibly productive. Incredibly productive. And you might think you can't grow eggplant. I think by the time you leave tonight, you'll think you can. It's really about getting the plants big enough that they survive the flea beetle onslaught. The other two are Pink Tongue Long for a dark purple, and Orient Express. All of these are Japanese eggplant. They're really what we favor. They're way more productive. They don't tend to go to seed as quick, so they keep their quality longer, and they don't tend to need to be peeled. On the other hand, Kendra and Rocco, two of the members of our community here, Rocco runs the animal operation for us at Grandview and helps with the vegetables all the time. They like the globe ones, so we grow Rosa Bianca for them, which is really gorgeous, you know. And I say, they just tend to get better too quick. And Kendra says, I like to soak them in salt water. I learned how to do that in a restaurant. I always do it. I like it. So great. We always grow some, you know, but they're not nearly as productive. They are gorgeous. And, you know, I really am not the one to recommend other globe eggplants because we don't tend to do them. Onions, we grow Pontiac, Copra, Cabernet, Red Wing. Cabernet and Red Wing are red ones. Pontiac and Copra are yellow ones. And we also grow Evergreen Hardy bunching onion. Evergreen Hardy, all of those other ones, by the way, are storage onions. You know, 2013, a lot to complain about as far as being a grower, right? The upside, all of our reds were incredibly sweet. It was so cool and wet that they were incredibly sweet. We really don't aim for sweetness in the reds. You know, Stockton red, I don't know if you can find the seed, but I used to grow that in California. Overwintered, it makes the sweetest red onion I've ever seen. I've not looked for it recently because we grow storage onions. And Copra, Pontiac, Cabernet, and Red Wing are all excellent storage onions. The two that sound red are the red ones, you know. And then the Evergreen Hardy is a bunching onion that's a perennial. If you leave one in, it'll just keep making more. So you can pull all but one in a bunch and they'll just make more. And they'll give you onions for probably 11 months out of the year, maybe 11 and a half months. There's about a 6 to 8 week period where it's going to seed. You don't get any onions. But if you let the seeds drop, you get a lot more onion plants, you know. They'll even in the dead of winter, they're called Evergreen Hardy because they'll freeze solid. You go out there and pull that out if the ground's not frozen, and be able to slide off this frozen, slimy outside, and inside there's this long, white, sweet, crisp onion. You know, they're really a great onion. Broccoli, we grow, I've already mentioned Arcadia, Blue Wind, Bellstar, Liberty. I think Liberty is the organic one. And there's a few others we grow too, but those are our go-to ones. We really like, I think maybe Meredith looked up and found this Pac-Man again. Pac-Man hasn't been easy to find. I'm afraid, actually I forgot. I think she found it and we bought it again, but I'm afraid it's a Monsanto-owned one. Also, I think premium crop, you know, I have a joke that they're the heirloom hybrids. Things like Better Boy, premium crop. They're really not heirlooms, but they've been around forever, and they're incredibly great producers. I really like them a whole lot. Lettuces, we grow regularly. We always grow Jericho in the summer because it takes the heat. If we have a cool, wet summer, it won't do that well. In which case, other romaines like Kaz or Paris Island or something like that will be better. Or Crisp Mint, they'll do better. We always grow Troutback, also known as Forellenschloss, our Speckles. It's got about 10 names, but it's a lime yellow, you know, greenish yellow with red splashing. It's really gorgeous, and it was Seed Savers. It was the favorite out of 500 when they did taste test. It's really delicious. Deer Tongue's another wonderfully delicious one. We tend to also grow Butterheads like Nancy. We like those a whole lot. We also, for winter, favor things like Tango, Winter Density, many other ones, many others. There's a huge array of lettuces, and what I've learned is I used to pay a lot of attention to winter varieties. Nowadays, I know that if I just use row cover right over the plants and plastic over the row cover, I can grow any of them. You know, I probably wouldn't grow the crisp heads because they have so much water, but the rest you can grow, yeah.
How heavy of a row cover are you using up here?
You know, for that system, if you simply use the medium weight, the standard most available one, but then, and you can't have that off or it won't grow on. You have to put that on only at nighttime when it's cold, but then you have the tunnel over it. They don't miss a beat. They'll freeze solid, but they freeze slow enough. And that's a whole winter gardening class, which we have a couple versions of online. But so those are the ones we grow for that. There's many other seeds. I guess I'll throw it open. What did I miss? What do people have questions about? Any other varieties you need recommended?
Tomato mist.
Tomato mist, I don't know that one.
I saw it in Johnny's.
Okay, is it a new one?
They said it'd be productive, but they didn't add the taste.
Yeah, that's, my experience is that ones that they say are productive, unless they're heirlooms, usually don't taste great. There's some tricks. Another trick to that is be sure you have enough potassium. Potassium is key to tomato flavor. So if you make sure you have potassium, your flavor will be better, you know. And you can foliar feed them too to make sure there's enough. Don't overdo it. You can have too much potassium, yeah.
Tomato grafting is just coming online now. It started last year and I noticed it and it's growing.
Oh yeah, it's been going for quite a while, yeah.
Strong root stock and put an heirloom on it.
Mm-hmm. 2 times now I bought the plants and grown them and didn't get around to doing it. Like I have to find the window. I'm going to start them early so I have time to do it. I hope to start them this week, you know. So yeah, and if you're doing that, Maxi Fort is a good rootstock. A lot of people use Maxi Fort.
They sell the whole plant already done for you, which I noticed this year.
Yeah, they do. Yeah,
Maxi Fort, that's good to know.
they charge you quite a bit for them if you're buying them. But yeah, they're probably worth it. I know lots of growers that do it and they swear by it. Supposed increased yields by 30%. You know, but the thing to be aware of, like we grow tomatoes and we lower them. If we grow them, lower them, and we bury the stalk, which renews the plant, we'll no longer have, you know, we'll have new roots, and then that'll change it, you know.
Normally on something like that, the only thing I would care to grow would be pink brandywine or some kind of heirloom.
Right. Yeah, I understand.
You think those things that increase that much using that rootstock?
I think they will increase the yield. They will not give you any more resistance to late blight. They'll give you more vigor, but what they give you resistance to is soil diseases. You know, they're quite resistant to soil diseases, but the upper part of the plant is the pink brandywine, and we all know what a wimp that is. You know, it may taste great, but it doesn't do well with blight. Yeah.
I'm wondering about varieties of or celery, and then also melons, like watermelons.
Okay. You know, Jeremy, having plant grown in silo where there's no heat, I'm not much of a melon expert. I know we like Blacktail Mountain and Orange Glow. Those are the two melons I know I can recommend. We also tried Edisto, was it cantaloupe? Okay. For some reason I thought it wasn't cantaloupe. Anyways, Edisto cantaloupe because it's downy mildew resistant. Downy mildew is a huge issue. And so last year, I should mention these. There's a company called Commonwealth Seed. They're going to be here to present on seed saving. They had a SARE grant to study downy mildew resistant plants. And from their first year, they recommend it. And I tried all of them. I was going to take part in their SARE grant and give them feedback from last year. I guess I should do it every year because by planting those ones, I got no downy mildew. So I can't tell if they were resistant or not because we never got downy mildew. First time in 4 years. But they recommended something called, I think it's called golden zucchini, golden patty pan. They recommended soy long, which is a cucumber, the Edisto cantaloupe, and a gourd that's name I can't remember, but I can show them to you. They're incredibly warty, and I'll look it up and we can put it on the web. And they actually at the Mother Earth News Fair last spring, they had them for sale, and they cut them in half and varnished them, and they were gorgeous gourds. So they had 4 cucurbits that were downy mildew resistant, and that's worth a lot. I've noticed in the catalogs they'll say downy mildew resistant, and downy mildew is like late blight. It's the same family. It's a really virulent, hard disease to fight.
Yes, this isn't a variety question, but are you going to talk about transplanting them up into bigger pots?
Yes, we
and
definitely.
what are the good pots to use?
Yeah, it's on the outline. I just basically, as soon as we're through the questions, that's where we're going. Yeah.
Question on cucumbers. Johnny sells a cucumber variety that's greenhouse, made for greenhouses. It doesn't need pollinating.
Thank you for asking. We got our big time recommendation. It blew us away last year. Corinto.
And Socrates is another one.
Yeah, Socrates is the new one, and it's cold resistant. I'm pretty sure. I'm going to try that this year. But both of Corinto, probably 40 to 50% more production than any other cucumber. It blew us away how many they produced it. We had about 20 plants, and we would at peak we had 70 some plants total in. We got 210 pounds one time in one picking, and basically 40% or 50% of that was these like 12 plants or whatever it was. The Corinto was just unbelievable in production. Now that was on a trellis system where we could bury the stems, so they went all summer. And various ones of those, we had quite a few different ones. Various ones wiped out during the summer, sometime in August through September. Diva was the one that lived longest. It's my favorite tasting, by the way. For flavor, Diva is absolutely spectacular. Theoretically, downy mildew resistant, I don't think so, but it says it is. But for flavor, it's amazing, And it was the longest lived. And then I'm pretty sure this one that's just got numbers, SC something, was the second longest lived. But the third longest lived was Corinto. So lives a long time, produces like crazy, it rocks. Socrates is probably another one. Thank you, I forgot about cucumbers. But yeah, I can highly recommend those. We also tried Little Leaf in the greenhouse, and I would say not for the greenhouse. It just sprawls so much, Likewise, a lot of people really like lemon cucumber. My experience is if you like lemon cucumber, find a way for it to climb because it'll take over your garden. It's incredibly...
Is that what they call a cucamelon?
No, I don't think so. Lemon cucumber is an heirloom,
Okay.
and it looks like a lemon, but the truth is when it gets yellow, it's going over the hill. I mean, what happens when cucumbers get yellow, But people love it for some reason. I'm not as enamored, but it's very popular, So, okay, yeah.
Was that Corinto in a greenhouse?
It wasn't a greenhouse, but I'm pretty sure they say you can do it outside too,
Okay.
But I don't know if the production would be the same, It was just amazing for production, And this year we're talking about growing a whole row of it, Yeah. Spinach, thank you. Tahi for when you're going into heat. And if you want to do open pollinate, it's going to be Bloomsdale and winter Bloomsdale. But if you want like the best production, Tahi is good in the winter and takes heat better than other ones. Just for winter production, space. Elliot Coleman told me that personally back in 2000. I didn't get around to trying it until 2012. I kicked myself for 12 years wasted. Leaves like that, and it just pick them and they keep coming and coming, For like a greenhouse operation or a protected thing, incredible production, There's a lot of other decent ones and good ones, but those are probably my favorites, yeah.
Do you know perpetual?
Perpetual spinach is actually a chard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a great chard. If you like chard,
Tastes like spinach.
it's got less oxalic acid. So people who don't like oxalic acid in their chard, are going to like perpetual spinach. I've grown it often. I like it a lot. And Harry Hamill turned me on to an Italian version of it, something Violetta or something, which he liked even more. And I grew it and thought it was pretty darn good, but I'd have to get seed from him again. So it's very similar to perpetual. But yeah, and okay, chard. My recommendation is you have to grow rainbow so your heart can sing. I mean, every year I just sit there and look at it like, I don't believe how gorgeous this is, because all these different colors mixed together. But if you want production, grow one of the green ones, Ford Hook or something like that. They'll outproduce the rainbow by a country mile, And kale, okay, winter boar is the most productive squash I know. It's not open pollinated. An open pollinated one that I'm really impressed with, developed by Frank Morton, one of my favorite seed breeders, is Rainbow Lacinato. He crossed Red Russian with Lacinato. I'm not a big fan of Lacinato. I'll get in trouble here. To me, it's just not nearly productive enough. I mean, it just doesn't produce that much. But crossed with the Red Russian, incredible. White Russian is also very, very productive. A lot of the other curly ones are very good. Collards, Wade told me again, we just got downy mildew last year for the first time. And there's a specific one, I'll have to look it up for you and get it back to you because I keep forgetting it. But Wade at Troy's greenhouse in Burnsville has one that he found that's quite downy mildew resistant. We've always grown champion and loved it. But now that we have downy mildew showing up, we'll probably try and grow the resistant one. I think we should probably move on with varieties unless there's any other birding questions. Okay, infrastructure. If you want to, you can make your own greenhouse incredibly easily. And we have a video about how to do it. And so it's simply rebar driven into the ground, good firm ground. At one end, where the end that you're going to eventually put over another piece of rebar to make your hoop, you actually put a second piece of rebar right next to the other one with the space only big enough to slide your conduit in. So it's held there then. And then you bend it around the other rebars. And you actually, because we want a Gothic shape so that it sheds snow, you actually pull it a little bit further at the end. And that kind of gives you this little Gothic shape. And why I say that it's good to have somebody else do it than me, because mine are always different, so my greenhouse is kind of a little wavy, People like Greg, probably you, Al, could every time get the exact same, exact same thing, I'm not that good at that end, Anyway, once you put that up, the plastic can be had very inexpensively, either from this catalog here. By the way, I'll just pass these catalogs around. You can look at them while I'm talking. Online, these people will sell you UV treated plastic by the foot. You can buy it also from Fifth Season locally and from Troy's Greenhouse in Burnsville. If I find out any other places, I'll recommend them too. So you can easily, basically less than a couple $100. You can, if you know how to frame your own end walls, you can put a greenhouse up in a day, and then you have a place to grow your plants, and that really is the best way to do it. And then we'll show you some options for heating those seedlings and not having to heat the whole greenhouse. But if you can't do that, then you can still grow seedlings. You grow them inside. You grow them under lights. Okay. At the Highland Lake Inn, Carrie Lindsay made these towers of lights. And except for the fact that even though they were grounded, since you were watering plants up above, even though we try to be careful, I once in a while got a little shock. I mean, you want to be careful about that. But there's ways around that. I would recommend it if you're doing it on small scale that you water your plants off, away from the lights if you're going to have stacks of lights, and wait till they're perfectly dry before you put them back on. We didn't do that. I'm still alive, Everybody else is, but that's not the same. And so I say you want to be safe that way. If you're doing a system where you're using water with electricity, make sure that you ground it even more. Use a grounded plug, but then ground it again. Just be sure that you're as safe as you can be on that. And pay attention. But you can basically buy shop lights at hardware stores or box stores that are pre-wired. You simply plug them in, and they used to be $7. I have no idea what they are now. They're probably 20. But they're still pretty cost effective. And for just for a small scale, you could basically probably just have a table. And I used to hang them. I don't like hanging them because they swing. They make me nervous. I've never broke a bulb, but they make me nervous. So I've actually learned to put them in some kind of permanent attachment so they don't move. And the thing about hanging them is you can move them up and down as the plants grow. And then I once stumbled across this whole bunch of thin sheets of styrofoam. And I just saved those and I just put them underneath and I removed the styrofoam as the plants grow. If you can figure out your own system for that, it's pretty easy. And we have it on video. You can see how to do it, Basically, the thing to know about the lights, you want the plants that far from the lights. The lights are not the sun, You got them this far down, they're not getting enough light. They got to be right under those lights. And you want to either buy the grow lights, which are pretty expensive, and it's harder to tell now because they don't really delineate it as much, but you want to get, if you get a warm bulb and a cool bulb, fluorescent bulb, that will do it. That will give you the right spectrum and you won't have to buy the grow lights, And so you really want them to be fully under the light and have plenty of it. And then either let them go for about 20 hours a day, 21 hours a day, or set them on a timer for 21 hours a day. They need tons of light if they're growing in this system. And they're still going to be weaker than ones that had natural sunlight. My recommendation is to get them up and get them growing and have all your seedlings. And then when you're home and the weather's nice, take them out. That's good too because they'll start to harden off. They get the wind. And even I recommend if you're not doing that, if you don't get to do that, or if it's going to be very far into their growth, that you brush the tops of them every day. Just brush them. And that creates wind effect. And if you do that a few times a day, they'll have a stronger stem. They can really get pretty weak under those lights, And if you try and put them right out in the garden without hardening off, you may luck out, you may not. Nice misty week when it's not too cold or too hot, they'll probably still do fine. Extreme weather, they'll probably just not make it, So you can put them out on the weekends when you're home or something. Remember to bring them in for hard frost. The closer you get to planting them, if the temperature's getting down to 36 or something, it's all the better, for springtime. They want to get used to that, But do it slowly. Don't shock them, They really can work we literally grew all the plants for the Highland Lake Garden. We started them all under lights, And he had 2 stacks. I think it was 10,000 seedlings under those lights, It worked very well. And indeed, that many, you didn't even need a heat thing. We put our tomatoes at the top, and they were heated by the heat rising. Even fluorescence will throw off enough heat that we didn't even need any more heat, So it can be very effective. Anybody can grow seedlings, Pay attention to safety. Electricity and water, not a good thing, Also remember, try not to break the bulbs. Mercury in those fluorescent bulbs, not a good thing either, But and you can also now buy, you can buy I call them the marijuana lights, the $100 ones, they'll. One year, Kerry was supposed to put a greenhouse up so we could grow more seedlings. He didn't do it. And he was doing hydroponics at home, and I just teased him. I said, Kerry, you got to bring me your marijuana light. And we set that up. It almost blinded me. I'm sure you can tell us about that. The incredible light. We have somebody from 5th Season here, Gary.
High intensity discharge.
Pardon?
High intensity discharge.
Yeah.
HPS.
Amazing production, and not just for marijuana. That's just my joke, But very, very incredible. And I couldn't believe the production we got from those guys. I left those guys on for 18 hours, and those plants were crazy. They grew incredibly. It was almost blinding to go into the room, And you can also, by the way, and you guys still sell the Mylar you can put up to make, you can also get Mylar. 5th Season is one of the places to carry it. You can put that around it, and that'll reflect light back in. You get a lot more value from any light system you have. You'll save energy that way too. So that's the system for that. For germination, you want humidity. And I'm going to show you a germination chamber. I don't know that you're going to bother for small scale. What does work instead is if you have, we'll talk about heat mats. And the catalog has them for sale there, and there's lots of places to get them. You guys sell heat mats?
We do.
Yeah. If you have those and the plastic domes, you put the plastic dome and you make sure, if you're using a heat mat, be careful, they'll dry the plants out. But the plastic dome is on there, you're going to create a lot of humidity that way. It's almost as good as a germination chamber. So I'd recommend the plastic domes if you don't have the heat mats. You could also, you don't even have to do that. If you're going to stay on top of it, you can simply put them in a big plastic bag and close it. Just remember to let oxygen in there and to get it off before the plants are being stressed by the bag being on top of them. There's many ways to do this. You don't have heat for starting your seedlings? I've never used the top of my refrigerator. It's warmer up there. You know, it's warmer because it's higher up, and also the heat's coming off the refrigerator. So there's many ways. It just depends on the one thing that really is not satisfactory is the window. Now, if you've got a grow window that's sticking out, otherwise they just don't get enough light. You know, they're really going to be weak. Maybe you can start them there, and if you're home a lot, put them outside whenever the weather's good. That'll work. I mean, I have literally carried 50 flats up and down basement stairs trying to get enough light to them. You know, mostly growing them in the basement, but wanting to get them, you know. And I don't recommend that system, you know. Yes?
Do you have to heat the greenhouse to do starts, or can you do an unheated greenhouse?
No, okay, so then we're going to turn the slideshow on. Okay. So this is showing the construction. We went to Granger's, and we got a remote bulb thermostat. We use the same one for both our germination chamber and our table. But you get ice melt cables, and I'm sure the manufacturer does not want.
Well, heat tape, they call it, heat tape.
Yeah, heat tape too, but you want it to be able to, you know, really take, you know, their ice melt cables they're strong, you know. And so we got those. The other, why you see the metal things there, that's what came. You can use wire or anything, but you really want to set them up so that the cables never cross each other. And why the gravel is there, you do not want those cables laying on wood. I showed this at Southern SOG in 2005 in New Orleans, and somebody as we walked in said, I put them on a wooden shelf one time, I burned my house down. You know, you have to have the insulation. They short out on wood, big problems. On gravel, no big deal. Heat's not going to get down through it. So you set them up, you use the metal to make sure they don't cross. And we have a table we'll show you with. It's not using the ice melt cables. You can also find catalogs, I think probably FarmTech has them, that'll sell you one that's preset to 68 degrees. And that's pretty good. I like to go a little higher, so I like to have the remote bulb thermostat, you know. But you set them up with the metal so they cannot move and they don't touch each other. And you just loop them in a table. So basically, we made heat tables, okay. You can also just use mats, but they're pretty darn expensive, you know. This cost us to set it all up, not counting the gravel. We already had the table, right? But for the hardware, to set the entire thing up for three was, I could fit 15 flats per table. So that's 45 flats. And for three of them, it was $50 for the no, I had to get two of them. So $100 for thermostats and $225 for cables. And I could do 45 flats. Much more cost effective. Those mats, I mean, you'll spend a lot of money on the mats to get that much, right? And with the heated table, I can just do tons. If you don't mind that it's only going to go to 68, those things are much more cost effective and you don't need a thermostat. You know, they're just set at one temperature. I think they're like something like 40 or 60 bucks. We'll show you one in there, you know. And they're readily available from several catalogs, you know. They're soil heating cables. But you still want to set them up so they don't cross, so you have gravel underneath. Then you put your plants on top of them, right? And so basically you put gravel under them and over them so that the cables are encased in gravel. That way you're sure that if it shorts out, you're not going to have the plastic catch fire, which that could happen too. The gravel is going to help make sure that you don't have any danger there. Once again, ground it really well. You're dealing with electricity and water, right? And then that still wouldn't protect the plants if you didn't have some cover over that, you know. The Great Easter Freeze, people remember that one? I mean, how bitter cold it got at the end of March. We've been in the 80s. I had tomatoes that were this tall, you know, and it was like in the single digits, you know. Everybody's Japanese maples died and all that. I had them in an unheated greenhouse with row cover over them and plastic over that. No damage. Thank God the power didn't go off. You know, if the power had gone off, I'd be hauling them down to the basement. But because the power didn't go off, I had enough heat just with a layer of row cover over them and plastic. Now, I didn't use hoops. I was caught off guard and I didn't have hoops set up. I've been pulling row cover over them all along. It got so cold in that greenhouse that where the plants touched, there was damage. But where it didn't touch, totally protected, you know. And my bill, that was the most expensive. I think it was still under $100, I think, you know, just because I used that movable insulation. $100 is not acceptable for me, you know. I want less. But I use a lot of movable insulation and I try to capture heat. Towards the end of the day, I'd close the greenhouse up and get it good and hot, you know, and just let the plants, you know, that, and then it wouldn't come on for quite a while. So I was into saving energy, you know. And I mean, a further refinement that Tom Elmore talks about, he covers his whole greenhouse with what they call concrete curing fabric. It's basically row cover with foam on it, so you can even hold more heat in your greenhouse, you know. So if you caught it at the end of the peak heat, you know, and covered it as soon as it was getting dark, you could hold more heat in the greenhouse, you know. I really don't like the idea of heating whole greenhouses. We might do it with the, you know, energy from biochar, and I'm okay with that, you know. But as far as if you're using fossil fuels, I don't recommend it. Okay, so that's, and then basically mats. If you're gonna buy mats, Fifth Season carries them. You can mail order them. They're pricey, but they're very useful. Get a thermostatic control for it. Don't try and just play with it. It's really dicey that way. And I mean, some of the older ones you actually had to put screen over them to ground them. I think the newer ones, they don't need to do that though, right?
Put a screen over them?
Yeah.
No, you put the trays right on the mat.
Yeah, yeah. There you would put the screen over it and ground the screen, and that was just an extra safety thing, you know. So the heated mats can be very effective if you don't need to do too many. I wouldn't do this table if I wasn't doing at least 15, you know. But if you're doing 15 flats, these tables get pretty cost effective pretty quickly. If you're just doing one, they'd be $125. Not counting the table or the gravel, you know, but just for the actual heating part. Okay, so germination chamber, we're going to go look at one in a couple of minutes. Germination chamber, basically, I had a bakery, so I had steel pots and pans. So I had a steel drawer. I got my friend Paul Lundquist to drill it, and you know, I got a and the parts I think are listed. We'll pull up a thing. I'm pretty sure I have the part numbers listed. I was able to buy a gasket for it, you know, so that it wouldn't leak. And we drilled it. We installed it in the metal drawer. That's a 120 volt element. Yeah, hot water heating element. Right. Yeah. And by the way, one time I got the wrong one. It was 220, and Gret said, "Oh, just be a little inefficient." It still worked, you know. I've killed at least 10 of these. I recommend immediately, if you're going to set up one of these things that you have, and I now have one, and you'll see what we have, a float valve, so that the water comes on automatically. Because it'll run out of water, it'll die. The minute there's no water, boom, dead, you know. Even that doesn't work because people come in and turn my water off, you know. Oh, the water's on, let me turn it off, and then dead, you know. But basically how this works, see that, the thing sticking out there on the upper left? That's the remote bulb thermostat, right? That's the remote bulb. And you might think, oh, that should be in the water. But no, you don't care what the water temperature is. You want the air temperature to be 72. So every time the air temperature drops below 72, this is a proof box for my bakery, it heats up the water. It's basically a shower effect. And so you have endless steam, but gentle steam, you know. And I had rainbow chard, speak of the devil, rainbow chard that right before I made this, I had planted a bunch of it in a seedling, like a 220 seedling. I wanted a lot of plants, right? Seed was a couple years old. I got about 4 plants. It's pretty bad for chard because each seed is multiple fruit, is a fruit. So there's many seeds in each one. I tried the same seed, put 2 seeds per cell to be sure I got germination. With the germination chamber, I got almost 2 plants per cell. You know, I mean, sometimes more than that, you know. Incredible what the germination chamber can do. It can make old seed not work well, speed it up incredibly, you know. I don't know that you need to do it unless you're doing larger scale, but it's really impressive what it'll do. And the same thermostat will work for it. I guess, how many people are interested in that? Because I actually printed a couple of handouts.
Is there light in that chamber?
No, because it's only germination.
Only germination.
Yeah, the minute they germinate, they got to come out, you know. It's not about heating plants. This is just to get them to pop. But it makes a huge difference in getting them to pop. You can really control. You can get peppers in like 4 days. My friend Wade at Troy's Greenhouses no longer puts his brassicas in there because he forgets them and they get too long. They'll pop in a day, you know, just like that. Yeah.
I used to know somebody in Oregon, and they told me that they would get a lot of their seeds to pop by soaking them in hydrogen peroxide for some amount of time, and I forgot how long. So, do you know anything about that?
I've not done it. It makes sense, you know. It would you know, distress the coating, and it would also provide a lot of oxygen, which they really like. By the way, Elliot Coleman recommends not covering your seeds because they like the oxygen. That's fine. Don't do it with onions. Onions have to have light in order to germinate. And there's a few other things, so pay attention. A book that I meant to bring down, and I didn't remember to do it, Nancy Bubel's Seed Starter's Handbook. I don't know if it's still in print, but it gives you all those kinds of details, you know. And apparently also now, Susan Ashworth's Seed to Seed, the newer version also gives you, her original one, which I have, just talked about how to save seed and what cross-pollinates. But apparently now she has the how to start them and stuff too. Did anybody notice where the germination, what page the germination, best germination temperatures was in the Fedco catalog? If people are looking at that look at tough, but you'll find it if you order from Fedco. They've got a great chart too that tells you the ideal temperatures. You know.
So you don't do your onions in there?
No, you can do it there. Just that's if you know. 1 year actually, I tried growing onions with a friend, and we just did red LA Coleman. We're leaving all our plants not the soil, you know, the seed on the surface, so they got more oxygen. Didn't cover them. We got absolutely horrible germination. I learned afterwards. Oh, they have to be in the dark to germinate. You know. Lettuce, on the other hand, if you want to germinate in hot weather, the more light it gets, the better it germinates. Cold weather doesn't matter, but in hot weather, light helps lettuce to germinate, you know. So it really thin in the summertime, you know. Okay, so as far as infrastructure, temperature and humidity and light, those are what you need. Bottom heat is the best, okay. We're going to make soil. I'll give you a formula when we make it. You know, we're going to head down there at least in the next 10 minutes, okay. If you make a greenhouse, only use UV plastic. You know, I jokingly say I collect the stories from people who don't believe me. It will fail you when you least want it to. It will not last. even though you think it lasts a long time, if you use it structurally, you're stretching it and stressing it by attaching it, and where the sun hits those stretches and stresses, it can go in weeks, definitely in months. It will not last. Do not use it. It's fine stopgap to stop frost for a night or something. Never count on it. Get UV treated plastic. You still sell it by the foot at fifth season, right?
We do.
And so does Troy's Greenhouse, and so does Farm Tech. No excuse. Okay, row cover. Does everybody know what I mean by row cover? Okay, so row cover is your way to save money on. It also, by the way, if you don't have the clear plastic domes, it'll hold humidity in and help with germination. Just remember that it blocks light. So if you're not, you know, giving optimum light and you're using row cover in the daytime, you're going to really slow down production. You know, so you know, use it, but be aware of that. It's the best way to ensure that you're keeping things warm at night. That's easy. And if you need more warmth, then a layer of plastic over that, and you're going to save tons of energy. You know. And do you guys sell row cover too, right? Yeah. Likewise, Troy's Greenhouse and Farm Tech, Johnny's, everybody sells row cover. You know. Really, those kinds of things, it makes more sense to buy it locally because you're going to save on the shipping. That stuff's all real expensive to ship, whereas they get it by truck and they're not paying nearly as much. So you're going to save money that way. You know. Okay, watering methods. I really like to get those really good water breakers. A company that I look up online, Gleckner. I think it's Goeleckner, I'm pretty sure. But if you punch in, you know, nursery supplies, Gleckner, good old Google will fix it for me if I didn't spell it right. They really sell nice ones. Do you guys sell good water breakers?
No, you're talking about the heads that have the millions of holes in them?
Yeah, and you get a really gentle stream.
We don't. I wish we did. Dram makes one too.
Yeah. I mean, I think you really need that if you're doing very many seedlings. I mean, you can carefully water a few, but I mean, in the springtime, when the humidity is low, like it sometimes is in March and April, and the sun is full, you may have to water 3 times in a day. You know, if you're going away, if you have to go to work or something, then you probably want to find a protected place, or at least use row cover, because it's very easy for them to dry out. You know, especially before they get their roots in there, when they're just tiny little seedlings. Once their roots are in there, the roots are holding water, they won't dry out as much. But it's a real issue, you know. So if you got a lot of plants, then you really need that water breaker to do it, you know. But I also put feeding in there. If you are not happy with how your plants are doing, maybe you use not as good as potting soil, or you made your own mix and your compost wasn't as good as you thought it was, then you can water and feed at the same time. I would recommend a fish seaweed mix. I would do it 2 label, which is usually 2 tablespoons to a gallon. And then you just find some kind of shallow container that will hold water, and you just put the fish water solution in there, and you set your flats in there, and you let them water from below. And they'll just suck it up, and they will boom. You know, it is much more effective than watering overhand. I can't really say why, but it really works really wonderfully. So I recommend that if you need to feed them. We make sure our potting soil is so good we don't feed our seedlings, and they're great, you know. And my favorite potting soil, except for 2013, when they fell on their faces incredibly, McEnroe. I mean, that just is really, actually my friend John Nielsen taught them how to make it, and I helped to tweak it back in the 90s. He would ask me, and I would give complaints about what in the deficiencies I saw, so I got to tailor make it. It was the go-to potting soil until 2013. I think they really, I think they've recovered, but I can't guarantee that they, won't have that kind of problem again. So, it's worth checking out. There's a bunch of other ones that are real popular too, and places like Fifth Season have them all, and you can go talk there about that, But you want really good potting soil. I guess I'll give you the recipe now while you're writing, because we're going to be in there. If you want to make your own, you want to have really good compost. And you could just buy McEnroe compost and not buy, when they're doing good like they did last year, you could buy McEnroe compost, or you can make your own, but you want really good compost, right? And you want to do basically 2 parts peat moss, not the black peat moss, but the regular old peat moss, right? Or you could do an equivalent amount of coir, which is the coconut fiber. 2 parts that, 2 parts vermiculite or perlite or a combination thereof. You could substitute half of that for sharp sand. I like a lighter mix, but that's what Elliot Coleman would recommend. That's for drainage, right? 1 part really good compost, or a combination of compost and worm castings. Humic acids are real important. The best humic acids you can get from worm castings. The diversity of life in worm castings are incredible. All kinds of growth promoters, really makes your seedlings jump. Never use more than 20%. The growth promoters, the hormones, the auxins and all that can actually inhibit growth if you use more than 20%. But you can grow your own. It's an incredible soil amendment. Okay? All right. Timing. Do know that for some plants, the timing matters a whole lot. Things like beets and stuff, whether you're sowing them out, we start all our beets in 1/28. We don't like how they do outside. It's hard they grow slow enough to get weeds and stuff. We really want to hit it. So those beets are gorgeous seedlings just as the worst of the early spring cold is passing. If we get them in then, sometime in late March, depending on the spring, or early April, we get spectacular beets. Wonderful beets. Likewise, if we get them in sometime in early to mid-August, spectacular beets. We can do them in the greenhouse many other times, but those are the kind of windows for that. So there are some plants that really the timing is pretty critical when they go out, Things like lettuce, no problem. Things like eggplant, peppers, you put them out too early, they're going to stunt. So you really want to time your seedlings. And literally, last year I realized we don't need to grow as much eggplant as we're doing. I mean, how much eggplant can we feed to the hungry, I mean, it's probably not the all-American food, really. We grow some because we love it. So we had too many seedlings that we started in April. And we put them out in early May. We didn't want to put them outside for another month. We stepped them up into 4-inch pots. And if you have the room, they were spectacular plants. And indeed, that's a key thing. Size. I recommend 1/28 or 72s for most production. But peppers and eggplant, if they're bigger, you do better. We like those to be at least in the big 6-packs, the 36 to a flat kind of size. When I have time and space, I like 3 to 4-inch pots. Particularly important for eggplants, because eggplants get attacked by flea beetles. If they're in a 3 or 4-inch pot, they grow way past the flea beetles. The flea beetles bounce off them. It's not like they don't eat them, but they're just not they're not going to be, basically they can be devoured by flea beetles if they're a little tiny seedling before they ever get ahead of steam. But if you put a 4-inch pot or a 3-inch pot's worth out, and how much eggplant does anybody grow, I even did that for production. I did 200-foot rows of, at least 4x4 packs, at least 4-pack size. And I tried to do 3-inch pots. And I was able to grow a lot of eggplant really, really quite well. I also use at least the 4-pack size for my cucurbits. We start almost everything in cells because of weed control, and also just space-wise, it gives us time to get our space ready and all that. So we grow all of our cucurbits almost always in cells, and we like the 4-packs for those. They do way better. They're going to be ready in about 2 or 3 weeks. Yes.
So when you put them up into 4-inch pots, what kind of pots are you using? Are you using plastic or biodegradable, some biodegradable?
Used all kinds, but we basically, when Waste Stream Innovations had way too many pots from Van Wingerden, we got a lot of free ones. So we just have stacks and stacks of different sizes like that, and we use those.
Okay, so you're not using the biodegradable?
No, but I think it's a great idea. everything I do, I drive all my coworkers nuts. I'll take 2 broken pots and put them together so that they complement each other. I just reuse things endlessly, you know. And indeed, you know, one of our growers, Marshall, is a commercial grower, and he's into throwing everything away the first, because that's how commercials grow. They haven't got time for damaged stuff. And so I just brought it to the nonprofit. It's probably more cost effective to throw those things away because we can afford to waste in America, right? We're rich. Our kids can't afford it. But right now, we can afford it, you know. And so I ran out. I said, I think it's more cost effective. Indeed, we had to sterilize them that year because of alternaria. And to sterilize those pots, you know, we don't use heat. We use oxidate, but still, very labor intensive. And they thought about it and they said, no, we're going to reuse them, you know. And I love that they have that same ethic, you know. It's just, I'm not going to try and preach it to anybody else, but we completely reuse them and reuse them and reuse them and reuse them. And eventually, you know, we have to give up. But we get a lot of use, and then there are places that recycle them. So I try to get them recycled after that, you know. Size-wise, I'd say the sizes are 128s, 72s. You might want to do a 280 or something if you were trying to start tons of peppers and it didn't have a lot of heat source. You could start them really tiny and step them up, but we don't step much up, you know. Celery is one that I do step up. And somebody asked about celery varieties. My favorite celery variety is Ventura. And I highly recommend growing it under cover in the winter, and it'll be revelatory. The quality of winter-grown celery is amazing. Other popular ones include Tango and Conquistador, but I really love Ventura. It's, you know, indeed, we've been saving seed, and we mostly grow it from the seed that we saved. And so celery is one of the few that I might, if I wanted tons, I would grow it because it's very slow to grow. It's not 8 weeks, it's 12 weeks before it's big enough to put out, you know. So I might start those in like a 280 and then step them up once I have other things out of the greenhouse because they're so slow to germinate, so slow to get started, you know. But otherwise, I think the 280 is way bigger than most people need. I've done it when I've grown lots of peppers and needed the heat early on for other things, and then I could put them on the heat as I got things out of the greenhouse, you know. But for the average home grower, I wouldn't bother with a 280. Probably not even a 128 unless you want to grow tons of lettuce or something like that. Mostly probably a 72 would be your standard size. And then for bigger things, probably a 36, maybe a 48. That's the bigger 6-packs, you know, but probably a 36, you know. And then if you're really going to push it for things like eggplant, go to a 3-inch or 4-inch pot. Okay, just know, sometimes it happens they have to call them back, but it can happen because you didn't take good care of your seeds. You can induce dormancy with too much heat. If seeds are collected when it's really hot and stuff, and you know, I think that there's ways around that. You might be able to cycle them through cool and back into hot and fix it. But you may have brand new seed and not know why it doesn't work. That happened to me once, so I tossed it in there, and it turned out that they eventually said we're replacing that seed because we can't, you know, it has heat-induced dormancy, and we can't get it to break dormancy. So if you got a mystery, that might be it, you know. Careful seeding. I'm going to do a demo. It's going to be a quick one. How many people need to leave right at 8? Great. If we can go about quarter after, we can cover the greenhouse hands-on stuff a little better. There are all kinds of little things, little seeder tools. There's a trowel-shaped one that you turn a little knob and it vibrates the seed off. There's a little round one with a clear plastic top, and you turn different sizes, and you kind of bang it, and it comes out a little beak that's got little bumps in it. And they all work on vibration, you know. But if you ever get into big production, I've got the plans. I'm happy to show you. You can actually use a vacuum cleaner, make your own seeder, and you can seed a whole flat in a couple of minutes. But unless you're growing many flats of one kind, it's not worth the trouble to pull the different size templates out and use it. But it works really wonderfully. I personally like a good crease in the seed envelope and making sure you have a thin line of seeds in that crease and tapping it. And I'll show you my technique. It's real quick and works great, you know. If you forget and let a lot of seed build up, then when you hit it, you got like 12 seeds in a cell. So you got to keep a thin line in that crease, but it works quite well. If you're not careful though, you're going to have to make the hard choices a lot of us aren't willing to make. I've ever found myself with 10 times as many plants because I was carelessly seeding and I couldn't stand to kill them. So I stepped every last one up. Anybody else done that one? You know? So seed carefully, you know. Pay attention to your germination. The older the seed, the more seeds I put in, you know. If it's 4 years old, I might use 3 seeds to a cell, you know. And there's some things that don't seem to care. Arugula doesn't seem to really care, you know. Parsley doesn't seem to really care. I don't really worry about those as much. I still get as much volume, no matter how many seeds. But by and large, pay attention, seed carefully.
Could I ask, how do you store your seeds?
Personally, I like to freeze them. We keep them refrigerated. But I have more money, and there's people who say you can't freeze seeds. It's like, that's how they store them in the germ banks, you know. I mean, germplasm banks, you know. I mean, that's where they store. That's the way we save, you know, these government big, you know, seed banks for all the seeds in the world. They store them in the freezer, you know. Do not collect your own seed and improperly dry it and freeze it. You'll kill it. You know, it's got to be properly dried. The rule of thumb is if you can do it, it has to snap. You know, if it doesn't snap, it's not dry enough. You know, but if it's dry enough, freezing to me, I've got 15-year-old seed I still use. You know, in the freezer. Outside the freezer, not so much, but refrigerator will work too. Do know that plastic containers, which we use, do not keep all the moisture out. And we've had problem with like butternut seed and corn seed getting moldy. The ideal is glass with screw lids. That'll keep all the moisture out. You know, and that's seed dies by the index of humidity and heat. You want to keep it below 100. You know, so the hotter it is, the less humidity you want. You know. The colder it is, the less you got to worry about humidity. But that's the way to keep it well, you know. And I know seed sowers, Rob Danforth, he basically keeps it in plastic buckets in his house, but he's grown it every year, you know. Yeah.
So you could just put all your seed packets into one or one or two or three glass jars.
That's how I used to do it. I have too many seeds now. We have all these little plastic boxes that kind of drive me nuts, but that's what from Tom Elmore, what he does is he gets rid of his seeds Tom is way more disciplined farmer than me. I really admire him. He basically keeps them all in a file, a regular old file, you know. And at the end of the year, he gives away all the ones that didn't last, you know, that they didn't use rather, you know. So if you do that, that's another way, you know. And he probably just keeps them in a coolish place in the house someplace, you know. If you have air conditioning, they're going to keep really well in a house, you know, and it's dry enough in the winter, a cool place would work, you know. You may need to do germination test if you're not sure. You know, it really can be heartbreaking if you're counting on something like a slow germinator like celery, and you're thinking, oh, it's just not up yet, it's not up yet, and it never comes up. And celery is not a good keeper, you know. The whole umbellifera family, or now it's called Apiaceae, does not keep well, you know. Okay, any other questions so far?
You pull a vacuum on that jar before you put it in the freezer, or just put a lid on?
That'd be best practice, probably. Sure, you know, that'd probably be best practice. I don't do that though, you know. And then there's an issue which, if you open it up too soon after it comes out, you can get, you know, the seed packs can get wet. So you want to leave it closed till you come up to room temperature, you know. And I cheat on that all the time, and I get away with it, you know. I'm just not, you know, I'm not that careful, and you know, if I keep them in the freezer, they last, you know. That's the main thing. But refrigerator's fine too, and if you use the jars and make sure they're really dry, you know, I would say what you don't want to put them in a jar with incredibly humid air, because then you're sealing the humidity in, right? Yeah. But if you can get them like in an air-conditioned house or something, get them in the jars, then probably a basement would be fine, because you've got dry air, and basement temperature is probably not going to be more than 65. You'll probably keep them great that way, you know. Okay, so okay, one last thing. For some things, I don't buy seeds. I don't try and start them. I'm over rosemary. I'm not real happy with stevia, you know. Lavender. These guys all, anybody ever try and grow these things? Germination rate's what? 12%? You know? Pardon? Time, yeah. I mean, I vegetatively reproduce them. You know, sage, yeah. Vegetative reproduction works great, you know. We've got a video about growing cuttings. I'm going to do another workshop this May. It's really easy and a delight to start things from cuttings, you know. Sometimes I do that because it's just quicker, you know. But for stevia and stuff, I'll buy myself one plant, get it nice and big, and grow as many plants as I want. Rosemary, I mean, once I taught Troy's that, they were so happy, because they were every year trying to get rosemary with, you know, to germinate. And I just get one big old bush and take cuttings, and boy, you can start them in water sometimes. They really want to root, you know. So that's what I mean about the side. Sometimes seeds aren't the way to go, you know. You can also, by the way, you know, have tomatoes going and grow. Oh, I want to have a late June planting, so I get tomatoes in September. Just take the suckers and root them, you know. Or maybe there's a really expensive seed. Can't sell them, but you can vegetatively reproduce that seed for yourself. And there's nothing wrong with that. So you can, I mean, there's tomato seeds can cost you a quarter or 50 cents each. fancy ones. Likewise, cucumbers and stuff. You can vegetatively produce any of that stuff, you know. And so that's the other option where you don't need to use seed. Finally, I've talked about my resources as far as which ones to start. I mentioned So True, I think, that I didn't have that catalog. High Mowing Seeds is a good source for organic seeds. Southern Exposure is a great local source. Seeds of Italy is a great one for really heirloom kind of stuff, Italian heirloom stuff, and that's now owned by the same people that put out Growing for Market, which is an invaluable newsletter. And Seed Savers Exchange, if you join that, you can trade and get incredible gems that aren't available anywhere else. And the information in there is amazing. I highly recommend supporting them. Everything else I think I showed you. I think we're done. I think we can go down to the greenhouse, do some quick demos. This here is a perfect example of something I'd yet to talk about. That's very important. You must control mice. That there, I think, is pretty effective. They'll eat your seeds. Even the newly sprouted seeds. You think you've got plants and they'll come tear them up, you know. And so I didn't notice that a breaker had gone off. I mean, people say it doesn't work. I found it's pretty effective. And indeed, since we set that up, I've only caught mice here where that doesn't quite point towards.
It's an ultrasonic.
Yeah, it makes a noise that we can't hear, and you know. The real expensive one, Diane bought a real expensive one for her little studio, and she watched the mouse dancing on it. You know, so the simple little ones, you know, I mean that's like, you know, I don't know, $15 or something like that. I've had it for years.
What's the make and model of it?
Just look and see. I don't even remember, but you know, check it out. You know, but the cheaper ones, I found them all like some that you just plug in. They don't even have a cord. You know, all those have worked fine for me. I thought it wasn't working, and then I realized that a breaker had been tripped and it was off. You know, can you close the door so the heat doesn't keep coming on? Anyway, that's why that's really pretty heartbreaking. I plan on having tons of spinach, you know. And they prefer spinach seed. They didn't hit the brassicas as bad because they're smaller seed, you know. But they'll cost you big time. We're trapping so many out of the Grandview greenhouse that I've connected with Carlton Burke, who's a local wildlife rehabilitator. I'm supplying him. He's tickled. He's totally tickled. He has to raise mice for raptors and snakes, and I can give him like 14 a day. You know, it won't be long. I told him it's going to be a short run, you know. But you have to, so these are 128s here, okay? And then briefly, I'm going to show you the germination chamber. You can look at it. I'll let people kind of rotate through. And then this is a heat table, and we'll actually look for that in a minute at that and, you know, just show you what we talked about, how they have to be. This we actually took apart and put back together. But here you can see how you would do it. The rest of this hasn't been set up yet, but see how the cables are spaced? They must be spaced like that. And they're locked in with little wire pieces, because if they move and they cross, they'll short out. They'll superheat and they'll short out. So you have to have them spaced. They can't touch anywhere. And then right now it looks like this is laying on wood, but we would put gravel underneath it. You must have gravel underneath it, okay? But this is the kind, you know, I think they're $60, I forget, but they're pretty cost effective. You don't have to buy a thermostat, but you're stuck with the temperature, which I'm pretty sure is 68 degrees. And 68 degrees is darn good, but peppers like it hotter, you know. So.
Now, is this the ice melt cable you were talking about?
No, this is actually a grow cable. It's called a soil heat cable.
Okay.
Ice melt cables, I loaned a bunch of them to Hector from Salsas, and they're there right now. But I'm going to be bringing them back down, so pretty soon you'll see them back in effect too. They're a black wire, you know. And then Gleckner's for about $80 sells you, you know, one that's designed for exactly the purpose as heat tables. This is meant to heat the soil, but works fine. The ice melt ones are meant for, you know, ice damming up in gutters, you know. And both of the other ones, if you're using like this and that one, probably if their lawyers found out, they'd probably try and convince us not to do it. You know, you're liable, you know, you're taking that on your own. That's not the application that it was made for, and beware of that, you know. Okay, I'm sorry the lights are out here, but anyways, down here, if you want to experience the effect, this should be, yeah, it's just starting to heat up. It hasn't been hot enough in here that it has come on much, but you can feel it's warm in there, and it'll be making steam because it'll be like a shower. So just go by, check it out, kind of drift in and out, check it out if you want to. That's our germination chamber here. I'm going to be bringing the one down that you all saw in the picture. That's a much nicer one. This is a homemade one. But literally, it takes hardly anything, you know. We use blue board because it's cheap for construction. You don't need to insulate it because you want it to come on, you know. If you're in a really cold place, you might want to insulate it because it doesn't have to come on that much, but it works quite well. And indeed, for the couple people that raise their hands, I have a couple of handouts. I couldn't get them to be big, but they've got the numbers if you use a magnifying glass for the exact parts that we got from Granger's. So you can go in and get the exact same parts, you know they'll work, okay? All right, so we're gonna probably roll the wheelbarrow up to there. We're gonna make potting soil. I'm gonna also open up this bag of McEnroe and show you what it looks like. By the way, I noticed as I was carrying it that it was way heavier than it should be, and that is not a good thing. That is, Claytonia, wonderful stuff. Basically, that is because Wade doesn't have the space to keep it under cover. He tried to keep tarps over it, but basically these bags have holes in them so they'll breathe. When they get wet, they can go anaerobic. This probably isn't that wet, but boy, it was a lot heavier than I wanted it to be. You know, if it gets too wet and goes anaerobic, then it's not going to be the best thing for seedlings. You'd want to take it out and fluff it and dry it really pretty, not bone dry, but, and then probably the life that was in there would wake up and it'd be almost as good as new, but not quite as good as new. You know, so it does it. You want to keep your potting soil moist but not wet. You know, so I'm going to open that up so you can see what it looks like. It's really great potting soil. I recommend it. Usually 2,000. Oh, I guess I took that knife off. No, there it is. Good. Really high quality stuff. This, by the way, and Gary, you all sell these this size, right?
Oh my God.
Yeah. This is the way to buy it. You don't want to buy the pre-made mix with the perlite. You can buy your own perlite and save a lot of money. This is the grower's size, you know. Really nice stuff. Plants just do spectacularly on it. We've used it reliably. I used to always make my own potting soil. And these guys came along and it's just like opportunity cost, you know. It was cheaper to buy it. 2013, it was more expensive to buy it because they messed up. It cost us big time, you know. But they straightened it out, and by the way, they made good. They lost a lot of money, but they actually replaced and gave, and just they did what it took to make it right, you know. But that's a relative thing. When your seedlings aren't working, I mean, they didn't, for farmers that didn't get good crops because of it, you can't make that right. They made good on the product, you know.
Is there a name on the bag?
No, that's because that's why this is the best price. The ones that cost more.
So you just look for that colored bag?
You want the growers, right? Isn't it called the growers bag or something?
There's premium and premium light.
Yeah, light's got this perlite in it, right?
Light has the perlite in it.
I don't recommend it.
Nothing on the bag. You're just
Yeah.
plain.
Okay.
Yeah. I recommend the premium because you don't need to buy. You can mix the perlite yourself cost effectively, but do know. And I said, Jeremy offered to water it, and I said I'd show you doing it, which is too bad now because we're running out of time. But do know that if you're using perlite, do it outside and wear a mask when you empty it into a container, and then wet it and keep it wet because you do not want to breathe that dust. You know, years ago we all thought asbestos was fine, and I'm still convinced that down the road we're going to say, oh boy, we shouldn't have been breathing that stuff. I just feel it when I breathe it. It's not good. You know, they call it a nuisance dust. I fear it's more than a nuisance. You know. But if you wet it, that just keeps the dust from coming up and you're fine.
What does the perlite do exactly?
The perlite, it provides aeration and spaces and makes it a lighter mix, you know. If you use vermiculite, it does that, but it also holds water, you know. Vermiculite, though, you want to get growers vermiculite, not insulation vermiculite. You want the bigger stuff. Actually, we have some of the finer stuff. When I say that I like to cover things like onions and stuff, the best thing to cover with is vermiculite. It excludes the light, but it lets more oxygen in.
Vermiculite is asbestos.
Pardon?
Vermiculite is asbestos. This is asbestos variety.
Well, it can have asbestos in it. There are ones that do and there are ones that don't, you know. And it's expanded mica basically, but it can have asbestos, and there's been some problems there for sure. And you want to pay attention. You want to get it from a reputable supplier for growers, you know. And still, the best practice when you're mixing this stuff is to wear a mask, you know, and also to wet those kind of things so you don't get the dust, you know. Okay, so we're going to bring these guys forward and that wheelbarrow forward, and I'm going to measure some perlite after I water it, and we're going to mix up our own potting soil. By the way, John Nilsson with Char-Grow threatens to make a potting soil, but he recommends, and I'm sure it would work fine, to use his source which is his first product that he came out with since the char grow plant came up, at 20%. The other 20% would be compost and peat and perlite or sand, you know. So you want 2 parts, right? 20% is 1/5, right? You want 2/5 to be the peat or core, and 2/5 to be either perlite or vermiculite or sand, and 1/5 to be compost. This is a recipe.
By volume, right?
What? By volume is fine. Totally by volume, you know. That's our compost. We make that. It's really nice stuff. And we can make a potting soil just as good as the macaron. We buy the macaron. You know. I mean, if they hadn't fixed it, we wouldn't have anymore. They were on the edge of not being bought, you know. But they came around again. So if somebody could go get those watering cans there. They should have water in them, and bring them back here. We'll wet the perlite, which is right back here.
Where do you get the perlite?
Perlite, the best place to buy it is Troy's Greenhouse. The best price by far. And if you're in this area and you catch me on a weekend and I can stop by there, I'll get it for you. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be putting Fifth Season down, but I doubt that they can beat the price. Yeah, but another good place to buy it is Fifth Season. You know, it's fine. You know, just that. Wade, by the way, he lives in Yancey County, so one time I was telling him he could make these herb planters and sell them for $35 each, and he said, "You do that, and they're all going to tell me I've gone crazy, and they're all going to go to Walmart." You know, so he competes with Walmart. Fifth Season is in Asheville; it cannot afford to compete with Walmart. You know, so if you don't have a connection to Yancey County, probably it's more cost effective to buy it at some place like Fifth Season. You know,
It is only $1 more to get it with the perlite already in it. It's not too bad.
That's not bad.
But you're getting less of the compost. So you're getting less soil. See, I think that's where the math makes it not as good. You know, you're getting 1/5 or 2/5 less, basically. You know, so I'd say that you're going to do a lot better to buy it the other way. You know, but don't trust me. Count how many flats you get from each one. You know, I can usually get 15 flats from one bag of macaron. You know, okay, so Jeremy was kind enough to empty this bag in here. We, by the way, got this from Valley Ag. That is way more expensive than Troy's, and probably even more expensive than, not to say, probably cost more than at Fifth Season. Not to say it's expensive.
Now you pre-wet this.
I wet this so I don't breathe the dust. That's the only reason.
I see.
It's just, it's a safety concern. It's not doing anything else. But I think that's very valuable.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I hate that dust, and I don't want to have to keep track of the darn masks. You know, so. I think. Well, you can get it through Fifth Season. I mean, not through Fifth Season. Because do you carry double nickel?
What is it?
Double nickel. It's one of the biofungicides.
It's hard to find.
Yeah. Seven Springs has it.
That's a lot further.
Yeah, no. Seven Springs. Do people know about Seven Springs? Can you scoop that in there? Yeah. We want 2 buckets. Yeah, 2 buckets worth.
If you can go to
Yeah.
Hendersonville and get it.
Yeah, well, yeah, sure. But people should know about Seven Springs. You should email them and get on the list, because if Fifth Season doesn't have it and stuff, they make deliveries. And also, they'll bring it. They'll ship it to you. Don't you buy from Seven Springs?
We're actually a distributor for them.
Okay.
But we don't carry all their products.
Right. But you probably could get it on a pretty regular basis that way too. You get it from more often. But they do deliveries too, like they take it to the co-op and stuff. And we buy most of our amendments that way, you know. When we don't do that, we get it from Fifth Season, you know. Okay. So this, by the way, this is the lighter stuff. It would not go in first. Okay. We're going to need 2 buckets of that. So 1 more bucket. So the first thing I'd put in probably would be the compost. And I guess to do that, I got to empty 1 bucket of the. And by the way, Jeremy was kind enough to moisten this. You want to kind of try and pre-moisten your peat moss. It's pretty slow to get wet. Okay, so you want to moisten it. I mean, I'm sure he soaked it, and I can hardly squeeze water out of it. You know, but he set me up really nicely while I was trying to make my computer obey and bring my pictures back up. And I got them to come up, but they all got smaller. I wish somebody could explain that to me. They were full size originally. Okay, so now we will empty the compost into here. And this potting soil, by the way, we will use this and we will think it's just as good as macaron. It just takes more time. And if you didn't make as good a compost as we can afford to make, then what you might do is make it 1 year and let it age, covered, and ideally under a tree that has the same mycorrhizal relationships as vegetables, willows, ivies, maples, a bunch of them have the same mycorrhizal relationship with vegetables because some of the roots would probably grow up and mycorrhizal inoculate it for you, so it's a good trick. But you'd want it to sit for a year. We do that, but we use that for compost tea. This is probably not from that pile. Anyway, yeah, you'll mix that in. And I would probably start mixing it right away, because yeah, just go ahead and keep dumping it. Just throw it all in.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's a shovel, but you know, I'd probably just do this. Roughly mix it. And then I go with, I don't tend to use sand. You can use sand. You'd replace perlite with sand. It's the same function. It's about drainage, you know. Or you can use vermiculite, you know. Any of those would work. I would not recommend straight all sand. I think it'd be too heavy. But you can replace probably a quarter of the perlite with sand and it'd probably be just perfectly fine.
So that's contractor sand.
Yeah, sharp sand, yeah. Yeah, you got to have sharp sand. It can't be, the round sand does not work. You know, it's got to, okay, so then we mix that in.
What was that?
This is peat, 2 buckets of peat. By the way, there's a claim that coir is more sustainable. It is true, we're mining the peat. We should be aware of that. The thing is, the coir is being shipped across the ocean from India. And I got to visit a soil plant, a Scotch soil plant, and the guy talked about how they make it. Basically, poor people stand with coconuts at basically spinning tires. You know, they get cars and get the axles spinning, and they've got nails driven into the tires, and they hold these things. So they have all these cuts and scars before they get tore up. And then their kids haul these huge bags of coir up onto the boats. On the other hand, they need those jobs, so it's like, but do we need to be hauling it across the world? None of it's easy. It's possible to do it with nothing but compost. You probably want to even lighten it more. The problem is if it's too high salt, that could be a problem. I know that some people have done it with leaf mold. Leaf mold might be the most sustainable answer, you know. And we should actually experiment with that and show and teach. I think I will try and make that a mission for next year, to try making it with leaf mold and see how well it works. Because this is not sustainable. I can't argue with that. You know, it's something that we do. Yeah.
Can I use this kind of mix with soil block?
Yeah.
Elliot Coleman uses. I just bought one of those.
It should work fine. By the way, the McEnroe, they originally developed as a soil block.
Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah, it's a soil block mixing. Someplace here we've got a 4 block. People, I didn't mention soil blockers. I really think soil blockers are for people who are making their own compost so they can afford to make the mix. And they have to be willing to use much more space and pay attention to the fact that you have to water carefully and you can't let them dry out. But they make a better seedling by far because they're a much bigger area. And basically, does everybody know what I mean by a soil block? Anybody not know? Okay, yeah. So I recommend them if you develop that niche. I know people that swear by them. Yeah.
So on that note, you said it's a much bigger area. Just out of curiosity, in these little 128s, I mean, how big can you let the plant go?
You can let it. We take broccoli right out of there and put them in the ground. But they got a short window. They're ready in about 5 weeks. If we're doing them in 8 weeks, they're stressing. You know. So
5 weeks, typically, you could keep it planted.
5 weeks, they're usually prime. You know. You tell they're ready by how well they filled out. You know. I don't think that there are many plants in here that are really ready. But maybe some of the overseeded arugula. Like I said, I don't worry about the arugula being overseeded. But yeah, they do work better that way. The 72s, you probably for sure could get 6 weeks in the cell, maybe even 8, you know.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the 72.
Yeah, and you usually get 6 to 8 weeks, right? Yeah, yeah.
Do you know anything about the things that are shaped like diamonds and they have no bottom?
The speedlings?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Speedlings are the styrofoam ones?
No, it's a new kind of thing like that, which is like diamonds and they have no bottom. I bought one of those at 50.
Are they wind strips?
I don't know what they're called, I'm sorry.
Wind strips were developed by Van Wingerden, I think. Is that what they are? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're willing to spend the money on them, those guys are the cat's meow.
See what it would do.
Well, I think they're great, but they cost a lot of money.
Yeah, I know,
Yeah,
$10.
yeah.
I won't buy another one at that.
Yeah. Well, I know some people that swear by them. Yeah. So notice this is the last thing in because it's lightest. It's easier to get stuff to drop down than come back up. So I went by weight, except for I should have put the compost in Yeah, but I had to get a bucket empty to use it. So, because I'm measuring everything by the bucket, right? It's not. It doesn't matter about what size bucket is. You could use a quart container and make that much potting soil. Just keep the same proportions. Everybody got the proportions?
Yep.
That's it. So now, if I didn't trust our compost, I might add azomite. I might add a slow release nitrogen source like feather meal. Though I've since read that feather meal is nothing I really want to use anymore because I don't know if you know it, but we tend to move things like lead into our hair. That's why they test hair. Well, chickens move it into their feathers. And they use a lot of metals in commercial, they use copper for sure in commercial chicken operations. So I've stopped buying feather meal, but it was my favorite for slow release, Now it's probably dehydrated fish or alfalfa, but if I was worried about nitrogen, I would amend with that. I probably, for this much, I would probably use a half a scoop. People know those little scoops that are like, they're probably about a half-gallon scoop, So I probably use about a quart, and that would be plenty. One thing you don't see me adding here, I think Jeremy was going to bring it in, but I'm not sure where he put it, is John Nielsen's product, char grow. That's stuff that at 7 pounds to the acre, he got a 50% increase in yield in tomatoes on the first 2 pickings. So that's basically a cup of char grow per 5-gallon bucket. Incredible production.
That was his original one.
That was the original. And indeed, they don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Got that when he first did,
Yeah.
right after the
Right, yeah.
char workshop.
And I bet you've noticed a difference too, right?
Oh,
Yeah, it makes a big difference. And indeed, they won't talk about it because it's an anomaly and they can't talk about that in science, but one year they had an 80% increase in yield. All the conditions were in, but that, not to mislead, that's combined with good cover cropping. If you don't have the cover crop in there for the microbes that he's putting out to feed on, you don't get the same effect. But Ron Morris made sure to ace the cover cropping, then he put the microbes, the char grow is simply, he calls it an inoculant. It's simply a place for the compost and the compost tea and other sources, worm casting life to get into the char. And then he puts that in the potting soil and it gets this huge impact. This stuff here is much more char. This is the source, wherever that bag went, right here. That's almost 50% compost,
Okay.
And then it's got char and rock dust in it,
So that's been cut.
Yeah, that's been purposely cut. That's a product, and it's a good product, It's pricey, but for gardeners, it's probably worth it, I don't know that it's cost effective for growers,
It's good on a small scale.
Small scale it is for sure, yeah. Intensive production, it probably is worth it,
Now, by the way, all plants don't necessarily get that. It's just tomatoes.
Well, broccoli. I've had big effect from broccoli.
Kale doesn't. There's some other plants. I saw some field trials, and they said biochar didn't do anything. As a matter of fact, it was worse.
I don't know if I trust those field trials.
Tomatoes love them.
Tomatoes love it, but I know.
Well,
I
I
don't-
think it's because, if I'm not mistaken, it probably was taking the nitrogen away from the plants initially, and then it probably would improve 2 or 3 years
I
later.
don't know.
That could be it. That's a big thing. This isn't a char talk. We got a video that's very popular to cover that. But I can tell you that people like Leon, who's down by Earth Fair, I forget his last name, and myself have had amazing broccoli using charcoal.
That's good to know.
And that's in the same family as kale. So I would dispute that.
I had amazing kale, the best I've ever had with charcoal, ever.
Yeah. So I don't know. A lot of science. People doing the science aren't growers. We've been very happy with everything, But I will tell you actually that although the char grow has a big impact, the impact is much harder to see on seedlings if you're using McEnroe. So the better your soil, the less the impact. I actually created a business for John from some of the better local farmers by taking seedlings that I grew of tomatoes. I grew them for no reason except for a demonstration, Mountain Fresh Plus, because that's what he was working with, right? And I grew them for the CFSA conference in November. Did you see those? Do you remember that? Yeah. The ones that without the char grow were the most pathetic, sorry little weak little tiny things. And then even the ones with the char grow, because the light was getting less, were really kind of like scraggly. But I could think about planting those in the ground. They were like 5-10 times better, And the cutting edge growers, the people I know that are always staying on top of it, they all buy the char grow from John. They just saw that and it's like, oh yeah, I want that vigor. Absolutely. And this is not an advertisement for any of John's products. You can do the same thing watch the video. You can make your own char, though please try to figure out how to do it as cleanly as possible and long term be thinking about capturing the energy. And then you can inoculate it yourself. You know, you don't have to buy John's product, but for small scale people that are busy, well, it's a big deal. Yeah. I'm actually right now, I don't know if people know, but my friend Tom uses my mobile oven to bake bread at the French Broad Food Co-op on Wednesdays. And he just had piles of char that everybody said they were going to come get, and nobody ever came to get it. So he said, Pat, I need it to go. I said, I'll take it. And now it's going in buckets, and I urinate in them. And then I add compost tea and EM and keep them in a warm place. And then I'll take that and I'll mix it into good compost. And then I'll use that on my home little farmette now in Sela. You know?
Well, I heard you can make your own EM out of just take some and put it in a bucket with a bubbler. Is that right?
Well, I know. Actually, you wouldn't need a bubbler. They tell you how to do it. You can multiply it. Eventually, folks, by the way, EM is basically an anaerobic positive microbes. It's called effective microorganisms. You can look it up online. They tell you how to make it, but you don't need to make it with those are mostly anaerobes. They can survive in the air, but they don't need it. You know. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to show was I must want to show seeding. Yeah, I'm going to do it here and then kind of rotate through, okay? So, this is a pretty fine seed. I put a crease in the bottom. I use the envelope side, so the lid side, so I can see. People say, what about the sticky stuff? It's like, I don't have a problem. They might jam up a little bit, but they'll go past it, right? And then I get it. So the seeds are in a thin line. Everybody see that? See how they're in a thin line in the crevice? Yeah. If you let them pile up, then when you hit it, they're all going to come out, right? And then I just kind of... I don't know if you can see that. I don't even know if the camera can see it, but basically they're coming out pretty singulated.
Yeah, I've tried that and had them all come out at once.
Well, but where you get in the crease. That's the key thing, is they have to be in a single line. If they're not in a single line, they're all coming out at once. But if they're in a single line, there can't usually be but 2 seeds at a time. Then just don't go hitting it hard. They'll go crazy. You got to get a tap down. It's worth practicing. If you practice for a half an hour, you'll have it together. And to me, all the other ones are too slow. Plus I lose them, you know, or I step on them or whatever. Every seed packet I have is a seeder. So maybe I'll just do it this way here to show you rather than make you all move up here. So I still don't know if you're going to be able to see though. See, they're basically dropping out pretty much singly, you know. So that's how I like to do it. I think it's superior to every other system, to tell you the truth, you know. Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to show, but then I'll take questions, of course. These are the domes I talked about, by the way. They'll keep mice out, but all you got to do is bang them and have them be slightly skewed, and the mice will be in there, you know. So the real solution is to get rid of the mice, you know. And I don't know of a greenhouse that doesn't get mice every change of the seasons, you know. You can wipe them out, they tend to stop coming, but they move in, you know. And once they're in there, it's like, oh, you're not only heating my home, you're feeding me too. I'll take it, you know. All right, so.
You got this set up on your tray.
Yeah.
You know, it's reversed.
Mm-hmm.
How high or how far away is my grow light? Not your...
Right above it. Right above it.
Right, there's some heavy duty lights.
Well, no, not the fancy, yeah, not the pot growers lights. They can be up in the, you can put those up at the Empire State Building, they probably work. I'm talking about the shop lights and the bulbs. Yeah, that's what I think most people are going to go with.
60 watt bulb.
Yeah, right, yeah. 40 watt. Yeah.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, those things, they'd melt them. But you can have the fluorescent bulbs, the warm and the cool. They're usually 40 watt, by the way. They can be right next to it. They're not going to melt it, you know. They'll work fine. The other ones, I mean, what do? They're about 4 or 5 feet up or something?
They also make a high output T5 bulb.
Yeah.
That's foregrown, so you can go down to that also. Fluorescent doesn't use as much power, doesn't put out as much heat.
Mm-hmm.
But the ones you're talking about are very high intensity.
Yeah.
Put out a lot of heat, use a lot of juice, a lot of electricity. You really got to be a professional grower to justify using those. So.
But boy, do they crank. Yeah. Yeah.
But the T5s,
The P5s are just another fluorescent like Pat
Yeah.
was talking about, but a higher intensity.
Yeah, and you carry those? So those that you can put, how high would you have those up?
I usually keep mine 6 inches off
Yeah.
the plant.
That might be worth it if you only getting a few setups, because then you don't have to keep moving the plants. I mean, 6 inches, you're not going to leave any seedling in past 6 inches. So it might be worth it. I was always production. You know, I got a bunch of steel shelves and I had them like, you know, right close to them, you know. But I didn't like the swinging chains, so I just moved them up rather than, you know, I moved them down. I put them all the way up with the stuff and then I'd slip one out every time they grew, you know. Anyway, I just wanted to show you something like this can be stepped up. And my technique is simply to tease them apart. And everything I do when I'm working with seedlings is I make them really wet. I actually like these to be damp but not wet because they don't cling as much. And you could actually turn each one of these guys into a healthy seedling. You know, you got a lot of root system there. You can actually keep the whole root system. They'll take a day to recover, but this is for those of you that didn't pay attention to seeding, you know. Or here, the mice got a lot, so I can multiply a bunch of seed because there were mostly singles, but a few places, I don't know, I hiccuped or something, and they got a few more. So that's about it. I mean, people could have their hand at trying this. I mean, these, you know, if you want.
So if you take it out of a 128, what are you going to move it into? Are you gonna move
I'd put these right back into a 128 because I just want to grow this size, you know. But if I'm going from a 128, I probably wouldn't bother to go to anything smaller if I'm going to step it up than what would be a 48. You know, the big 6s.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
is it worth enough effort to go from a 128?
Yeah, I mean, this here is just, I'd be doing it to multiply to fill out the flat, you know. We grow seedlings now for gardens that grow for the hungry. I love doing it, but it's a responsibility. Oh yeah, we'll grow them for you, and then something goes wrong. So last year, we had downy mildew on a lot of our brassicas. So the ones that didn't have downy mildew, boy, I was looking for every double, every triple, separating them out and stepping them up, you know. But I was stepping them right back into a 128. I wasn't going to grow bigger plants. I was just trying to get enough plants, and we still short. Does anybody want to try pulling these guys apart? Just see how you can tease them apart. Does anybody else want to try?
Once you transplant, you're going to water from the top or the bottom?
We water from the top almost exclusively here. Best practice, water from the bottom. Absolutely best practice. We don't do everything best practice, you know. Yeah.
What's your best resource, do you think, for like a timeline for, okay, when do I want to start my onion seeds, and when do I want to start my celery, and when do I put them in the ground in this climate?
I'll rattle it off right now.
Yeah, do it.
Okay.
I'm ready.
You should have had your onions started already.
What's that?
Should have had your onions started already. It's not too late. I started in the middle of March one time and got huge onions, but it's harder, you know. So start them. I mean, you can start onions. There are some that can go for over winter. You can start them, yeah, from seed. You can start them in October. The bigger the plant, the better they're going to do. But it depends. See how many days it says. Some will say they can be either 90 or 245. The 245 are the ones you start the year before, you know. So that's onions, okay?
When do you put them in the ground then?
I'd put them in the ground. I mean, you can put them in early if they're nice big plants, if you got them started early. If there's going to be a week where the weather's settled enough that they're not going to be bothered, you know. But you don't want them to go out and then have it get bitter cold, you know, or have wicked wind and stuff, you know. But if you got, you know, good weather in early March, all the better. I put them out as late April and still had them work. But I paid attention to making sure, you know, onions and garlic and leeks, right, and chives, the allium, no plants respond better to enough nitrogen, you know. And nitrogen really rocks. If you're a home grower and it doesn't gross you out, the sustainable future is urine. It leaves the body sterile with the exception maybe of salmonella and a couple tropical diseases. If you store it for a month, they now say no, and tropical diseases you don't get here unless you come from the tropics, right? Store it for a month, they now say that's enough. The alkalinity changes and there are no pathogens. It's balanced nutrition. You use that for things like onions, they'll boom. 10-to-1 dilution. You know, dilute it 10-to-1 or you'll run into problems. 10-to-1 to water. Okay, that's a sidetrack. Okay, so onions right away. I'd start celery. I'll probably start my celery. If I'm not going to protect it, and it really, celery, Chinese cabbage, fennel, they're plants that if they get a week or more of 50-degree temperatures, they vernalize. And I'm glad I said that because I forgot to mention, if you're starting seedlings in an unheated greenhouse, things like tatsoi, mizuna, and stuff like that, if they freeze hard when they're bigger, past the first 4-leaf kind of stage, they can vernalize and they'll bolt a lot quicker. So you want to keep them from freezing. and then they won't vernalize. But celery, fennel, Chinese cabbage, they vernalize just lots of cold nights, a week to 10 days of cold nights, and they'll vernalize, and a lot of them will bolt. So if you can count on protecting them, you know, small scale wall of waters are plastic and fabric in May when we still get those cold nights, and they're going to take 12 weeks basically. You know, if you want to get them to a 1/28 size, like 10 to 12 weeks, I'm happy with 12 weeks often. That's 3 months. You know, so if I want to put them out in May, I want to start them towards the end of February. You know, I want to start them in March. You know, you can also be starting. You don't have to, but if you're going to give them protection, all of the salad greens, the stuff you see here, spinach, you just start spinach. You starting it in August, and you don't stop until sometime in March. You know, you just keep starting successions, planting them out with protection. You can keep getting spinach. Maybe you don't want to do that much, then you pick maybe 3 times so you get the spinach to go the way you want. You know, lettuce, all the salad mustards and all that. Anytime now you can start them if you're going to use protection. If you're not going to use protection, I'd probably wait till about beginning of February to put out the middle of March. You know, if you're assuming 6 weeks to having them ready, no, it's 5 weeks for us with these guys. Okay, for things like broccoli, cabbage, and stuff like that, I want more settled weather. I'm probably going to wait till the end of February. I'm going to put it, well, maybe even mid-February if I want to try and get out in early April. But basically, that's what you do. You look at when am I happy putting stuff out, and you back up by either 8, 6, or for us 5 weeks. You know, so for all those kind of guys, I'm going to be starting them sometime between mid-February and mid-March. You know, so I want to be putting them out sometime between late March. I don't like putting a lot of stuff out before late March. You know, I got garlic and stuff, unless I'm going to use protection, which we have greenhouses, so we don't have to. But I highly recommend you do. That if you don't have greenhouses, you use fabric and plastic to grow some intensive beds of wonderful salad greens, you know, stuff like that. I'd also be starting, you know, sometime in March, kale and collards, for spring kale and collards. You know, I'm going to wait a little longer. I want my broccoli to go in the ground no sooner probably than like the first week of April. So then 5 weeks back, I'm going to be starting in March, you know. If I'm going to put it in a greenhouse, then I might start it like much earlier so it can go in the greenhouse sometime in February, you know. So that kind of cycle. I don't tend to start tomatoes anymore till at the earliest for our greenhouses that we're heating sometime in February. The exception is going to be playing with the grafting ones. I'm starting those as soon as I can because I don't get them done because it intimidates me and I'm busy. So I'm intimidated, I'm busy, okay. You know what happens with those, you know. They're this tall and they never got in the ground, you know. I mean, they never got done. But otherwise, I start those guys, you know, if I'm going to put them in a greenhouse sometime in March, except for we have some heat at Grandview, so we're going to start sometimes in early February to put them out in mid-March. But you're not going to do that. You're going to put them out if you know the weather around here. You're not probably putting any tomatoes out until the middle of May, unless you're using wall of waters or something like that because it's just too iffy, you know. Peppers, I always wait till, except for the ones that we're putting in greenhouses, I wait till early April. So I'm putting them out, you know, or even mid-April because I don't want to put them out till the end of May, you know, 6 to 8 weeks. Eggplant, I can start them a little earlier because I'm going to step them up.
When you say greenhouse, are you talking about a heated greenhouse?
No.
Or are you talking about a hoop house?
I'm talking about an unheated hoop house or greenhouse using row cover and inside insulation too. We now have some heat at Grandview, so we can move things a little bit further, you know, and this fancy curtain that holds in heat, you know. So we're going to see how much we can push the envelope. I think basically it's an ecological crime to heat to grow food. I think we can just grow what works, you know, and you don't need to heat. We now can, and I think the exception is maybe you can use a little bit of heat if you're trying to make a living at the beginning and the end. So you can get them in a little sooner and hit market earlier and extend a really productive crop a little later with a little bit of heat, you know. And that's probably, but you do it strategically, you know. So basically the successions, I keep doing successions, you know. I wouldn't start squash. Basically they're going to be ready 3 weeks for the 4-packs. So if I'm going to put them out with protection, I'm still not going to put them out till sometime in early May. So I'm going to start them sometime into the second week of April. And then I'd start successions. There's a good reason to try and get the winter squash out early because downy mildew now is hitting us earlier and earlier. If you can get it in the ground early, you can get a crop before the downy mildew hits us, you know. So that pays off that way, you know. What crops am I not thinking? Okra, we direct seed it. We don't, I mean, once in a while we seed it, but we wait till heat, you know. It's just not worth putting okra in the ground without heat, you know. Likewise, I want for the heat to be there for the peppers and the eggplants. I mean, those guys, melons too. We just don't rush those things. They want heat, you know. So basically I covered most of what you do in the springtime, I think, didn't I?
You never mentioned corn.
Corn, we don't, in California where slugs eat everything, I grew it in pots. You know, I use half-gallon milk containers and stuff, you know. Here, we direct seed that, you know. And I mean, I know people who put it out incredibly early and they get away with it in April and stuff like that. It's usually treated, but you could probably do that otherwise. We're so busy with other things, we get it in sometime in June if we're doing good, you know.
What about what type of corn? Because I see corn so
We've
radically
been,
changed that I don't know, I'm not.
we try and use
comfortable with
organic. We
corn.
tend to use luscious, which is a good organic bicolor, and we just can't not grow Silver Queen. Silver Queen and watch out if you're buying it from growers, they'll tell you any white corn is Silver Queen because they know that the market loves Silver Queen, you know. But you can taste the difference. I mean, you know, Silver Queen's long season though. There's a bunch of other good ones. It's called Sun Treat, is an early one. Tuxedo is recommended by Barbara Webster because it's got a really tight top, and so it gets less worms, you know. But there's buku great corns. I don't mean to, you know, be just talking about. That's just what we grow. We've kind of developed our preference, you know. And then come fall, a lot of people don't get that you start your seedlings for fall gardens as early as June. And indeed, the best Brussels sprouts I ever grew, I thought they were broccoli. I started them in April. They were huge and they made amazing Brussels sprouts, you know. So things like, well, I would direct seed parsnips, but the earlier you get them in, the better, you know. I usually don't have time to think about them until sometime in June, you know. If you got them in May, it'd be all the better. But rutabagas and stuff like that, no later than July, mid-July or something like that. I've cheated with every one of these and made it work. But for best practice, if I start my rutabagas sometime like the 3rd week of June to put out 5 weeks later, I'm going to be putting them in right about when I want them, you know. I've done other ways and made them work by covering them and bringing them through the winter and stuff like that, and they'll work. Beets, we like to have them in the ground sometime in August, so we're going to start them 5 weeks back, you know. Spinach, I don't want to get those guys in the ground till the middle of August, you know. Simple as that, because the heat's not, and a trick for spinach that time of year, if you don't have a walk-in, we do, so we seed them and put them in the walk-in. They don't want to germinate. The heat just keeps them from germinating. If you can't do that, put the seeds between moist towels and watch them. You don't want them to get real long and weak. The minute you see that radical popping through, then seed them, and then you'll get a great stand. But you can really be stalled out by heat for spinach, you know. Watermelon radish, believe it or not, we sometimes start those in cells. They really want to go in the ground sometime in August, and mid-August is ideal. A lot of people direct seed it, but we tried again this year. You can go in number 3 and see. We got these great greens that we sowed sometime in late September. We're never going to get a root any bigger than this. Watermelon radish has to go in early. Baby white turnips, there's a long window. We direct seed and we start them in packs too. I'll start those guys as early as the end of the 1st week of August, and we're still seeding them all winter. Those ones like salad greens, you just can keep seeding them. You can grow them year round, you know. Purple tops, I like to put those in the ground sometime in August. I put them in as late as the 1st week in September, and in a good season gotten great turnips, you know. Fall broccoli and cabbage, my ideal is to have them ready to go in the first couple weeks of August, you know. Lettuce, it's succession year round, but a big crop I want to start putting a big amount in August, and then through towards the end of September, and they're going to bear like crazy. Escarole, it's a real dance. I love escarole. I only recently learned about the faster ones. I was always growing the 85-day one. I can't say that I'm always as successful with escarole as I want. I hit the sweet spot once in a while, but it really wants to not always make that nice, tight, creamy head, you know. What else am I forgetting? Can anybody think of anything? Melons. Melons, we grow them in packs. We don't start them till sometime in May. We want to put them out when it's totally settled in June. You know, they do not like the cold. You know. Anything I didn't think of?
Cucumbers.
Cucumbers, we do them like winter, like squash. We start both summer and winter squash sometime in April to go out in the ground in May. You know. Now for greenhouses, we're starting them earlier because we're putting them in the ground in early April. You know. But for outside, we want them to go in the ground. And I've ever put, like, peppers and stuff, I will not push the cold because they stunt. I've not found cucurbits to stunt, so I've ever put them out there in a warm end of April and protect them with row cover, and maybe if it got really cold with plastic, and it was worth it. I got an early crop, and I had squash before anybody else. So those you might push it a little bit, but you have to use protection or they'll really suffer. But if you don't want to have to protect them, aim for the middle of May, and just go 6 weeks or 5, depending on your cell size. Really, is going to tell you whether it's 6 weeks or 5 weeks, or maybe 8 weeks if you're using the big 6-packs. That really is, the schedule really is like, well, how long are they taking the thing? When do I want to put it out? That's the way to figure the schedule out, Yeah.
You keep on mentioning row covers. What do you use? Do you use just floating row covers, or do you use the hoops or
We have the fiberglass hoops. We use those. We have wire, 9-gauge wire, and I'm a big advocate for a lot of things of not using anything.
That's what I was curious.
But peppers and eggplant, they'll be irritated by that, especially Rime. I prefer, by the way, not the Rime, which is polyester, but the other brands that are not polyester. What's the other one now?
Polyethylene?
No. It's spun bound polypropylene. Yeah, I prefer polypropylene. I find it lasts longer and it's softer. So I go with polypropylene. There's Agribon is one, but there's a bunch of varieties. Mostly I find they hold up a lot better. And once again, it's a compromise to me to be using this thing that gets thrown away, but boy, do I get the life out of them. The guys have to tell me, Pat, we're ready for another roll. There's too many tears, I find that actually even the tears don't matter much. I mean, there's enough mitigation that they don't matter, yeah.
What are all the things that you like to direct seed?
I don't like to direct seed anything, but I have to direct seed carrots. I don't like to direct seed because it's much easier to control weeds if I'm putting plants in. They're big enough I can mulch them and stuff, I'm definitely a transplant kind of grower. But you can direct seed baby white turnips, they'll thrive, lettuce, spinach, beets, We've just found we get better results with seedlings for most of them, Radishes, I mean, I direct seed the little radishes. I do not start Easter egg radish in cells, But things like watermelon radish, I'll start them in cells. They'll do great, I direct seed shungiku. I didn't mention my favorite radishes. My favorite radishes are watermelon radish and shungiku, which is a half-long pink one. Both of them have great greens to eat, and both of them thrive in cold weather. Shungiku, though, can go into, I don't think it's worth growing any radish in the summertime. I'm sorry, maybe some people do, but for me, they're just too hot. They give me indigestion. And if I don't like something, I don't want to grow it, So people like hot radishes, somebody else can grow them for them, I just, once it's getting hot, I stop with radishes,
When do you direct seed them then?
I direct seed them if I had a warm spell in February. I direct seed them and put row cover over them, And I keep doing that till, for me, sometime in late March, and then it's like, it's going to be too hot for what other people might well go into April. And we have different years. I mean, some springs are so darn cold that I should have seeded them up to the end of April. Maybe the end of May. I mean, this is the mountains. I mean, we can have some pretty funky weather, But for me personally, my window is sometime from February to the end of March for how I like them, Though, to be fair, and I wrote a whole article about this for the Express. I don't remember the name of it, unfortunately, but if you go through my articles in the Express in their archives, basically, Getting Started, that's what it was called. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Basically, if you like radishes a lot and you plant them in April, if it's a good cool April, there's no problem because they're going to go so fast then. They're going to be ready really quick. The ones I start in February, they're not going to be ready in 3 weeks. They're going to take 5 weeks probably. So they're going to go faster and faster, and that's true with beets and everything. You plant beets or peas in early March and then plant them at the end of March, you'll be hard pressed to tell the difference by the time they're ready. You'll probably gain a week. For 4 weeks ahead in planting and struggling with keeping them healthy, you might gain a week. Because they're all going to depend on light too, and they're just going to grow so slow and put so much energy into surviving in that cold weather, So, but I go into great detail about that in the article.
When do you put peas out?
Peas, I used to put them out early, and now we put them out late. But we've been getting a disease the last few years. Last year we didn't even bother. We're going to move to a new place. And also, I think a lot of people probably really got hammered by hot spells the last few springs, where the peas are looking great, and then it gets really hot, and they go south before you ever get peas, So we were discouraged, but we're going to try again. I just ordered 25 pounds, By the way, when I sow peas, I sow a band that thick. I don't sow a row. I sow a band that wide. and I get a big stand, you know. Not real thick, close, but a lot, because I find if I try doing a row, what I lose, I get a really spotty row, you know. So I do a few rows, I get a better row. I sow a band, I get a lot of production. Best production I ever saw, a woman sowed her entire bed, the width, like a 30-inch bed at Mountaineer. She sowed them at the end of April. I thought, boy, those are gonna never work. We had one of those cool wet springs. She had the most amazing production of peas I ever saw. I did it in 5 weeks with that kind of weather. She was eating the peas 5 weeks later. I couldn't believe it. The end of May, she had peas. You know, other people still were getting peas from ones they sowed way earlier. Her peas were just lush and gorgeous and bearing like crazy. Sugar snaps, you know.
When do you sow them then? When do you like to sow them out?
I personally like to sow them sometime between the middle of March and early April, you know. But I've learned not to say they won't work later. It depends on the year. I mean, the best peas I ever saw went in the end of April. I thought it was really a lost cause, but she wanted to try them, and boy, she proved me wrong, you know.
When you sow them in a band like that, you just hand sow them?
I try to just scatter them, yeah. Or you could use an earthway. I don't like earthways for that because they pop the plate out,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
So I tend to hand seed them. I also like, if I'm planting them, especially earlier when the soil's cold, I like to pre-sprout them. Not by much though, just enough that the radical's showing up. You know, you see this white thing starting to swell on it. I put them out then. I always inoculate legumes too, you know. Put them out then, I tend to get a great stand. The other thing about peas float, to quote Jim Stockwell. They do. You ever notice that? You put them in, you cover them, and next thing you know, they're all uncovered. So be prepared to come back and put some more soil over them, you know, rake it over. I mean, that drives me nuts, but they do it, you know, and just accept that they're going to float up, you know. Maybe you can put them deep enough down that they won't, but they're going to take a long time getting up that way, you know. So just accept that they float, you know. I think we've gone way over by now. I'll take questions. I'm fighting a cold. I'll still talk to you till 1 o'clock in the morning if you got questions, you know. But I don't want to make people, you know, stay, you know, where are we at? Are there more questions? Any comments? Anything you thought you were going to learn that you didn't learn?
All good.
All right. Well, thank you. Happy seedlings.